All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Are we ready to start from the IT side? Okay, very good. Thank you. Welcome. I'm Catherine Lucero, and I am the chair of one of the chairs of the SYTF subcommittee to look at the Title 15 and Title 24 regulations for the SYTF. We are the subcommittee from the ESC, which is the Executive Steering Committee appointed by the board, the BSCC. I would like to start with having my co-chair introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. Ezekiel Nishiyama, advocacy and community organizer with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, also a credible messenger within juvenile halls, and the co-chair of this SYTF subcommittee.
Thank you. And then recognizing that we're not fully, our membership hasn't all made it in the door because there was a little bit of traffic. We're going to go ahead and start nevertheless with introductions for those who are here. And so let's go ahead and start to my right. I'm Dana Lacey. I'm Deputy Chief Probation. Sure.
Hello again. I'm Dana Smith-Lacey. I'm a Deputy Chief Probation Officer, and I work for San Bernardino County Probation.
Good afternoon, Kalisa Rochester, Merced County Probation. I'm a Chief Probation Officer.
I'm Allison Ganter, Deputy Director here at the Board of State and Community Corrections.
I'm Roberto Luca, Program Director for a reentry organization, Mass Liberation.
Chris Eldridge, Program Coordinator with County Behavioral Health for Sacramento.
And then I would also like to have our staff from the BSCC introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Ferreira. I'm an analyst here on the Regulation Revision team at BSCC.
Hello, Howie Lee, Office Technician here at BCC.
Good afternoon, Matt Cinco, Staff Service Analyst for FSO at BSCC.
Good afternoon, this is Lindsay too. I'm part of the Regulation Revision team. Thank you.
You don't escape back there. Oh, Ginger Wolf and Sean Moore are representing BSCC in the back, and then I'll pass it over to Aaron.
Hi, good afternoon. Aaron McGuire. I'm the Chief Deputy Director and General Counsel for the BSCC.
And I know I have also just, I'm from the Office of Youth and Community Restoration. I am the director as well as co-chair, and I know that I have several staff online. I won't have them introduce themselves, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have Council Lisa Hartz. I know that Miguel Garcia is online. I believe Will Lightbourne is online as well. And perhaps a variety of other folks. So just to kind of level set and center us, today we're going to be looking at the Title 24 regulations. Ultimately, what we are going to do is present our recommendations to the ESC to review and hopefully include in the regulations package. So today specifically, we have a really robust agenda. After all the introductions and kind of housekeeping, we're going to have a panel of speakers that will focus in on facilities and kind of some best practices and give us some maybe broader scope of in our thinking. Specifically, it's an expert panel on therapeutic facilities. So that will be a kind of a learning opportunity for all of us to have at the same time. It's about a half an hour. And I want us to remember that these regulations focus on the physical plant itself. So it doesn't focus on the programming and it doesn't focus on things that we might consider to be soft aspects of the facilities themselves. Another thing to note is that the any of the recommendations that we identify and make are for the future. They're not for existing regulations, existing facilities. So we are going to have a lot of discussion about what a therapeutic, maybe a more home-like normalized setting would look like in an institution, in a facility. But these changes would apply to the future and to a certain extent may apply to a modification or a remodel. But again, that's going to be case by case. So I just kind of want to have us remember it's a fairly narrow what we're talking about today is not how we're going to fix the current facilities. We've been joined by more of our staff, more of our committee members. So I'd like to go ahead and have Joni Spears introduce herself. Is that enough? Yeah, that works.
Great.
Hi, I'm Kelly Nadler with the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office with the Rising Scholars Program.
And we also have another BSCC staff member that joined. And I want to welcome all the people here in person that have joined us today and people online that have joined us today. So I'm going to say this at this time. Today, we're really going to be identifying topics in the regulation, Title 24 regulations that we believe will apply especially to SYTF youth. We may find, as we did when we walked through the Title 15 regulations, that the ideas, the concepts, the improvements that we have apply to all youth. But we specifically are going to identify when we go through the regulations, areas and topics that apply, we think apply to SYTF youth specifically. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to help us with some housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair Lucero. Good morning, everybody. Really happy to be here again. I'm just going to go over a couple of things and then I'll quickly go over the agenda, what our day will look like. A few notes to the community members on Zoom. We've changed how we're conducting public meetings on Zoom a little bit. We really want to ensure that our meetings are organized and stay on track, and that all members of the community have a chance to be heard. So everybody will remain on mute. You will have the ability to raise your hand to get into the queue. And when we go over public comment, you'll be able to see how we'll introduce members from Zoom to provide public comment. We don't have a chat feature on the Zoom right now. If you do have questions or concerns or comments, please use the email regulations@bscc.ca.gov, and we can take those questions, comments, and recommendations through email. We will be able to post messages and links if there are specific questions about that to the Zoom chat as well. I want to just remind members that we have to press the microphone button, make sure it's green, and speak right into that microphone so we can make sure that everybody on Zoom can hear you. Our agenda today, we'll take a few minutes here just to go over our public comment, our goals, do a little bit of process updating. As Chair Lucero mentioned, we are focusing on the Title 24 physical plant standards today. And then we're going to have a great opportunity to hear from some experts on and really important food for thought on these therapeutic environments. So I'm grateful to Elisa for coordinating this panel. That will happen hopefully right around 1:30 and will be about a half an hour, and we'll have some time for some questions and answers as well. Once that's over, we'll get into the work of the meeting. We'll brainstorm what concepts you'd like to see in Title 24. We as staff will be able to provide some context and distinction between Title 15 and Title 24. So we'll also be able to answer any questions that you have, wrap up, and then we'll have public comment. Does anybody have any questions on the agenda so far? I am going to pass it over to Ezekiel to please go over what public comment will look like at the end of our meeting. Thank you, Ezekiel.
Thank you, Allison. For public comment today, we will be having public comment at the close of the meeting. Please keep comments to 2 minutes, affirming, not repeating someone else's comment. The purpose of public comment is to seek input on decisions that are being made on SYTF regulations. Please try and keep your comments focused on this work. SYTF subcommittee members have access to the tremendous amount of community input that was provided at the outset of this process. Additionally, there will be time for public comment at the following points in the process. One, when the ESC reviews SYTF regulation revisions, when the ESC finalizes proposed revisions, when the BSCC board approves final revisions, and during the Office of Administrative Law 45-day public comment period. We will take in-person comments first. In person, if you are submitting public comment in person, please submit your card to Lindsay. She has her hand up. And then you will be called on in the order which they're received. Please indicate if you know what regulation or topic you'd like to comment on, and we will be very flexible to make sure you're heard and have the time to speak, also centering voices of those formerly incarcerated, system impacted, and those that work with our population of youth. Zoom participants will raise their hand, and Ginger will add you to the queue and will call on you once in-person is complete. Are there any questions? None. Okay, I'll pass it back to Allison. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll go over public comment right before we jump into that portion of our agenda as well. So I have a number of process updates that I'd like to share with you all. I'll quickly go over the process update, and then we'll talk about two of the topics that both this committee and the Executive Steering Committee have talked about quite a bit, the separate set of regulations for SYTF facilities, and also what's going on with emergency regulations. So first, for the process update, I wanted to make a note that I've been working on regulation revisions for about 25 years, and this is the most complex one so far. I really think that we're coming up with some interesting adaptations to the process and to the regulation revisions. It's requiring a lot of flexibility, but all of that, all of the work, even some of the discomfort in this process is going to provide us with a really, really solid set of regulations at the end. So I'm excited about the outcome. I want to remind everybody that I'm going to give you a process update on the work to date. Today, we're focused on the Title 24 regulations, what could be included for the SYTF youth. We're not going to look specifically at Title 15 regulations today. And at the last SYTF meeting, you provided many, many concepts for consideration into the Title 15 regulations that will apply to the SYTF youth. And we had a list of topics, we had public comment, we had community input, and those concepts are going to go, they've actually gone to our staff. We're taking those concepts and we're putting them through a thorough analysis and integrating them into the current regulations. We don't want this subcommittee to get stuck in wordsmithing. So one of the reasons why the last meeting was so successful is that we were able to hear all of these ideas. And again, what our job as staff is to do is to take those concepts and put them into regulations. So we've begun that drafting process. You will have a copy of the draft regulations to see to make sure that we've captured what this subcommittee believes should be in there for SYTF youth. You'll actually be able to see it before the executive steering committee will see it, and that's for a couple of different reasons. We will plan to have one more SYTF meeting after this one, so that you'll be able to see the work you did in the last meeting and the work that you do in this meeting show as strikeout and underline regs, regulation revisions. So after you've had a chance to review those revisions in that next meeting, they'll go to the ESC for a final review. When we have that ESC meeting, what we hope to do is have our chair and co-chair be present and be able to call out as the ESC is going through what regulations specifically apply to the SYTF youth. Since the ESC is not quite done with their full review of regulations, that meeting where you will review the draft regulations and then the ESC will review what everybody's put in, isn't quite on the schedule yet. It's taken a little bit longer for several reasons, but we are now moving ahead. So I just wanted to let everybody know, again, we worked on concepts for Title 15. Staff is taking those and drafting those into proposed revisions. We're going to do the same today. We're going to talk about concepts for design and construction for Title 24 regulations. Staff will take those and turn them into regulation revision. We're going to wait for the ESC to get all of their work done, and then we're going to combine those recommendations. This committee will see them first to make sure that we have the SYTF stuff verified, and then the ESC will take up the whole package. Does anybody have any questions about that? Because it makes sense in my brain, but I want to make sure that it's clear to everybody here, our timeline. Excellent. I got through all of that. Look, there was a whole page of notes I didn't even have to read. That was fantastic. Okay, so that's an update on our process, what we're doing today. We'll probably say it many times. We're focused on Title 24 today. The next thing that we're going to talk about, and I'll ask Chair Lucero and Aaron to provide any additional information and detail about why we're not moving forward with emergency regulations. And basically, in summary, we had discussed and developed some concepts for emergency regulations that didn't meet the definition of a true emergency in the Office of Administrative Law process. That's the agency that adopts these regulations. Additionally, when emergency regulations are adopted, they're adopted very quickly. There is no lengthy public input process. There's not as much transparency and the process moves really quick. So it would take away some of the work that these groups are doing and having these robust processes where there's community input and discussion. So we didn't want to thwart that process. And I'll ask Chair Lucero and Aaron to weigh in on any of the discussion related to the emergency regulations.
Not really much to add, Allison. Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of many discussions between the BSCC and OYCR on whether or not and how to proceed forward with the emergency regulations or not. And as a whole, we just thought the process would benefit by the slower process of just moving forward as we're going along.
Yeah, I know that it seems a little convoluted on how we were looking at emergency regs and now we're not after listening to feedback. The OYCR wanted to memorialize legislation that was in place and have it be memorialized in these regulations so that facilities could be inspected for those new legislative mandates. But we realized that might have been not what everybody wanted. So I wanted you to know that that's where our concept came from, that, oh, this is now the law, so why don't we just, in an emergency, put it in the regulations? But we agree to pull back, and we agree that we'll have it be processed and that there are still law, but it just won't be inspected in these regulations without emergency, in an emergency fashion. It'll go through the entire process. So just kind of wanted to give some background on how that even piqued everybody's consciousness and came about in the first place. Okay.
Any questions? Thank you. So the final update and topic of discussion was whether to have one single set of regulations or two sets of regulations, one applying to existing facilities and another to specifically to the SYTF facilities. We've been having these conversations at both the ESC level and at the SYTF level. And it's a question that we've been talking about for quite a bit. We have taken a careful look as staff for a number of reasons, and which I'll talk about. It is staff's recommendation that the ESC develop one set of regulations for all of those facilities. Of course, as part of one set, there will be regulations that are specific to SYTF youth. There are differences in juvenile hall and camp regulations in certain sections. But in general, where there are recommendations that are coming up that would apply to SYTF youth, it makes sense that those improved regulations, for lack of a better term, apply to all youth in juvenile halls and camps as well. In fact, as we're reviewing and starting to draft some of the ESC and SYTF regulations, SYTF subcommittee recommendations side by side, some of the recommendations are almost indistinguishable from one another. The ESC and the SYTF are coming up with similar recommendations for all youth. So it does make sense, and I want to continue to mention that it does make sense to consider those youth, especially the older youth that are staying in these facilities longer. What do they need? What do these regulations need to contain to make sure that those young people, some of them may end up in a juvenile hall and a camp and an SYTF. What can these regulations be for those young people as well? And we're talking about in this last meeting, access to extra clothes, laundry, commissary, better and longer programs, having a different handbook, having access to different types of hygiene products, those sorts of things. So there really still is a focus on the different type of youth that are coming into our juvenile detention facilities, but that all youth in facilities would be better served by improved regulations. And of course, the ESC is going to be weighing on this as well. This committee will have opportunity to weigh on it as well. And I'm presenting staff's recommendation at this time. And then I'll also ask Chair Lucero to add her comments to that.
And obviously, Ezekiel, if you have any remarks, but today, I don't think we need to sort out whether or not they're separate or same. I think that it would be great to go through the various topics, and there are 3 sections that we'll be going over today that within Title 24. And I think that once we see what we believe would need to be different, at some point down the road, we're going to have this conversation. Should they be separate or should they be together? Should they be one or should they be separate? But I would urge us to see what we have before we, for lack of a better term, battle it out over the different sides. Let's see what we have. Let's see what we're assessing. Let's see what the staff comes back with. And perhaps there will be areas where a middle ground could be reached in either within one document or in 2 documents. I mean, these are really conversations that we have to have, but I don't think we have to have them today. Would really like you to continue thinking about the value of having separate regs and the value of having one reg. I realize that there is a lot of, we're already seeing that when you have a youth in for 3 years versus a youth that might be in for a couple of weeks, that there are some differences that may need to, that we would like to have be different. I don't know if that is something that the regulations could solve. That's all. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about what's needed, and maybe we're not even thinking about something too, right? Because this is an opportunity to add, amend, create. So, let's not be confined to what is here. If we can think of a third way, let's be willing to do that as well. So just wanted to make those remarks. And does Ezekiel, did you want to say anything?
No comments, just gonna go through the process.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's it for process updates. Thank you so much. We're going to pass it over. I don't see Elisa up on our Zoom yet, so hopefully there she is. That was perfect timing. We're really grateful to Elisa Hart over at OICR to have some expert panelists share with us what creates a safe space, a safe therapeutic space for youth in detention facilities. One of the things that you'll hear from us throughout this is that so many of these concepts are incredibly important. We're focusing on building structures and furnishings. So where there's questions about whether some of these concepts are something that we can put in Title 24 or perhaps Title 15, we'll get into that a little bit as well. This is really going to be a fantastic discussion. I'm going to hand it over to Elisa to introduce our panelists. Thank you so much, Elisa.
Thanks, Allison. Can you hear me okay? Great. So we're really looking forward to today's discussion about the Title 24 regulations, which, as Chair Lucero and Allison described, are focusing on the physical and design standards for secure youth treatment facilities, this brand new type of facility that the state has never had before. As the subcommittee is thinking about developing minimum standards for SYTFs, we thought it would be helpful for you to hear from some experts with insights on how physical spaces and design elements can support the type of healing, programming, and positive therapeutic relationships that we want for our young people in these SYTF facilities. Specifically, we're going to hear from a researcher about principles of trauma-informed spaces and from a practitioner about implementing those principles in a secure setting. I'm really excited to introduce our two experts and thank them both so much for their participation. First, Dr. Danny Soto has more than a decade of experience in research and analysis of adolescent well-being and risk, with a focus on gendered and racial ethnic inequalities. They graduated cum laude with a BA in sociology, emphasis on juvenile delinquency, from the University of Montana, and received their master's degree and PhD from Bowling Green State University in sociology and criminology. Dr. Soto spent 4 years as an assistant professor at Bowling Green. Wanting to use their professional skills in research and analysis in an applied way, they made the transition to the nonprofit arena. At Impact Justice, Dr. Soto helps to lead a diverse team of researchers working on program evaluations, conducting training, and providing technical assistance. Recognizing that true justice requires attention paid to the intersections of race and ethnicity, sexuality and sexual identity, sex and gender expression, gender identity, and socioeconomic status, they frequently examine disparities in these areas. Our second panelist is Rachel Gibbs. Rachel is the Director of Adult Services, Mental Health, Learning Disability, Healthcare in Prison, and Psychological Services at the Southern Eastern HSC Trust HQ in Northern Ireland. Rachel is an occupational therapist with more than 27 years of experience working in healthcare around the world. Rachel has delivered and developed services for people of all ages who live with disability and/or marginalization over the course of her career. As Director of Adult Services in the Southeastern Health and Social Care Trust in Northern Ireland, she has responsibility for the delivery of mental health, learning disability, healthcare in prison, and psychological services. So just to save as much time as possible for the discussion, I'm going to cut these descriptions of their vast expertise short. Each of these experts will present for about 10 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and discussion from the subcommittee. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Soto. Thank you.
And we'll have your slides up there, Dr. Soto, and you can just let us know, maybe just raise your hand and we'll advance the slide for you if that works.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. So thank you for the introduction, Elisa, and thank you to Director Lucero. It's great to see you again, and to the rest of the subcommittee members for having me today. I know I only have 10 minutes. I'm going to try to keep us on time. So I might be going a little bit fast through the slides, but you all will have the slides to review afterwards as well. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. We can go in the next slide. And so just some background information first, just talking a little bit about trauma and the central nervous system. Our central nervous systems are designed to help protect us in the event of a life-threatening event or situation. And when we experience a traumatic event to this level, our central nervous systems are designed to respond with instinctual responses, right? The fight, flight, fawn, or freeze responses you might be familiar with hearing. And these responses are intended to help us survive, make it through these situations. In cases of severe or repeated trauma, the central nervous system can become dysregulated and not be able to kind of come back down to baseline. And this can lead to chronic activation of the central nervous system, which activates these survival responses even in non-threatening situations. And this can result in hypervigilance, anxiety, panic attacks, difficulty sleeping, and emotional reactivity, symptoms we commonly associate with PTSD and complex PTSD. And so calming down the central nervous system is crucial for those who've experienced trauma. Next slide. And so today I'm just going to talk about creating trauma-informed spaces and focusing on our 5 senses, right? Kind of a somatic approach or a body-centered approach to trauma-informed space. Next slide. There we go. So first, sight. Thinking about what can youth see? What can they see from their rooms? What can they see from common spaces? What can they see when they're outdoors? Things like soft and calming colors for walls and decorations can help create soothing environments. Natural elements like plants, nature-inspired art, green spaces, having green spaces, maybe even trees visible from windows can be very calming and soothing. Is there sky visible anywhere? Are there skylights? Are there open outdoor areas? Also think about, we do a lot of talking about creating a home-like environment or the least restrictive environment, right? Think about the kinds of windows that we would like in our own homes, right? Large with views of the sky and views, pleasant views, not just necessarily, the building right next door and things like that. Some places, some facilities have windows that are, maybe 3 inches wide and 4 feet tall, right? That's maybe not the ideal, right? Thinking about lighting. Is lighting dimmable? Are trying to avoid flickering lights or lights or replacing lights that flicker. Is there adequate darkness for sleep? We know that some level of light is necessary for proper monitoring and safety regulations, but is there adequate darkness for sleep? Are you given sleep masks? And so look around, right? Imagine yourself in the same spaces that youth are, and what are they seeing, and how even are rules worded and posted on the unit and in common spaces. Next is a focus on hearing. It's important that folks can have access to quieter areas where if folks are feeling overstimulated, overwhelmed, they can kind of retreat and find a sense of calm. Think about ways to reduce noises. There's acoustic materials, panels you can put on walls and ceilings to help minimize noise and echoes that can happen, when we have hard walls. Rugs can also help absorb noise, soften the sound of footfalls and things like that. Think about ways that we can minimize, metal on metal banging and clanging sounds, right? Like doors opening and closing and things like that. Obviously, doors need to be able to open and close, but are there ways to soften that sound? If background music or sounds are used, we want to make sure that those are, kind of calming and non-intrusive and not going to make people feel anxious or be unnecessarily distracting. Touch. Is there comfortable seating? If you were in the space, where would you relax? Is there any place that you would want to relax? Is there furniture that's cozy and inviting? Is it with soft cushions, right? Temperature control. This is something that, in my own direct experience, youth at numerous facilities have complained that spaces are too cold to feel comfortable. So maintaining a comfortable temperature in the unit, in rooms, and in other spaces like classrooms and libraries. Texture variety can be important. Having a range of textures available, like soft blankets, rugs, stress relief items like stress balls, Play-Doh, fidget toys, things like that can help people kind of self-regulate, and it can be a grounding exercise or activity. Look around and see how many things are hard and cold, right? And can any of those things be replaced with more inviting options? And of course, clothing, right? The fabrics and materials that we wear closest to our skin, are those things comfortable to wear? Taste. This is really important. This is something that, many of us maybe don't think of as a big priority, but food can really go a long way towards helping people feel comfortable and safe as well. So comfort foods, simple and familiar foods that evoke a sense of home, comfort, and safety. And always, as always with things like this, right, remember to seek input from youth in your actual facilities, because obviously things like food preferences are not universal, right? They vary by culture and all these different things. And so we want to be really locally responsive to youth's needs. And obviously the quality of everyday foods. This is difficult. It can be food produced at large scale can feel inherently institutional, but it's really important that these don't just meet baseline nutritional requirements, but are also appealing and hot and warm, inviting, high quality foods. Smell. Smell is also important. Smell is one of those senses that is often very unconscious, but it is often cited as the sense that is most closely tied to memory. And so thinking about how we can mitigate harsh smells that might be somewhat unavoidable, right? Harsh chemical cleaning smells and things like that. Is there opportunities to introduce aromatherapy? Both lavender and chamomile aromas have been shown in research to help lower blood pressure. And fresh air. Is there any opportunity to bring in fresh air or allow fresh air through windows or skylights, things like that? And then finally, I spoke about a mixture of hard and soft aspects of facilities, but some direct suggestions for space considerations is to think broadly about how the senses can be engaged in familiar and comfortable and comforting ways, right? Having access to a kitchen can be healing, right? In our own homes, kitchens are often the hub for gathering, sharing food, conversation. They're also learning opportunities for life skills and learning how to meal prep and cook meals for each other, and sharing meals together with staff as well can be really great ways to build community. Something else that's kind of innovative in the field that we've seen increasingly in school settings are rooms that are kind of set aside, and they're called different things, right? Cool down rooms, regulation rooms, things like that. But basically they're rooms that are designed to help people be able to self-regulate, to kind of recover from overstimulation, overwhelm, and kind of help return their central nervous systems back down to baseline. So spaces that are quiet, that have lower light than is typical, might have aromatherapy available, variety of textures, maybe a sound machine to help block out noise. And so this is a good opportunity to think through where individual rooms that the youth have for their personal use might not be able to be customized to this degree, but a spare room in a unit could be converted, Or, if you're talking about designing from the ground up and new regulations, you might have the opportunity to really build out a warm, inviting space that young people can have access to when they need it. And again, several schools in California have adopted these, and they've seen great improvements in student behavior. And then finally, these are just some suggested readings I have for you. Some of these are articles, some of these are books. There's also a really great comprehensive report that my organization put out around food in prison. And the last two articles on this slide are more directly related to how architecture can promote healing and promote sense of safety. And so I thought those would be good resources for you all as well. So that's my time. Thank you all very much, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that I might be able to help with.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serro. Turning it over now to Rachel Gibbs, who is joining us from Northern Ireland, by the way. So special thanks for a long Zoom commute.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. Yeah, it's really lovely to be here. It's 9:30 at night here in Northern Ireland, so on a Friday night. So I'm very grateful to be asked. It's lovely to be part of this. I've been doing some work alongside some people in California for the last few years around prison work, so it's great to connect to the young people side of it. I'm going to move quickly through my slides so that we have more time for questions. Northern Ireland, as you will know from the news, is a big post-conflict zone. And really after the ceasefires in the late 90s, there was a huge focus on our prison population and how poor we were in comparison to the rest of Europe. And so over the next kind of 10 years, and really over the last 20 years, there's been significant change. And in some ways, being really far behind was a bonus, because there was so much focus on the negativity. We had to think differently. And it's lovely to listen to Danny, because so much of what you talked about is what we've been implementing over the last 20 years, and it really does work. So we have two facilities. Obviously, we're a very small country, and a very low incarceration rate in Northern Ireland, about 67 per 100,000, so very low, and even smaller for young people. But our 10 to 17-year-old facility is called Woodlands. We just pop to the next slide. Yeah, so Woodlands was built in 2007. It was seen as a sort of center of excellence. It houses about 48 young people for girls and boys. It has small units of six units for sort of 8 people. And there was a big focus on soft furnishings, on light, on access to green spaces, on purposeful activity spaces, soft furnishings, comfortable beds, places where family members can come and visit. The double bed at the top of the screen, that's where the family can come. And then we can jump on to the next one. The next slide is Hyde Bank Wood College, which is for our up to 25-year-olds, 18 to 25-year-olds. And we've moved away completely to a new language there. We don't talk about prison or we've moved away from any sense of the word incarceration. So it's a secure college. The focus is entirely on education. There's lots of access to libraries. It feels like a college campus when you're inside it. There's obviously a big fence around the outside, you can see on the screen there, but there's a lot of green spaces, lots of activity. And the cells are, the top right-hand side, you can see it's a pretty traditional cell, but the young people can choose the color of their room. They can choose some of the furnishings when they arrive. There's something about choice and consistency we started to introduce, which has really made it a big difference. And the picture in the middle is the cafe, where there's a barista and the young people can learn all those skills, but it's also where the staff, we go for coffee, they serve us. It doesn't, you could be in any cafe in this, in your own city. It doesn't feel like a prison space at all. And that is the main focus, is that we're trying to completely shift to think about what it is to be a young person, and how do we make young people feel safe and give them opportunities for growth and development. And it's all about, I suppose, the future, reducing their offending rates to create a safer society. Okay, so the next slide, please. So when we started to think about our spaces in sort of maybe 15 years ago, we were trying to think about who, what do we know about the people who end up in prison? And of course, all of these facts, I'm not going to go through the details, you'll have the slides, but it's the same the world over. The people who end up in prison are the ones who are disadvantaged. They're already failed in many ways by the society that they're a part of. And so our job, their punishment for the crime they've committed is just being separated from society. And we see that as that is their punishment. We don't need to do any more punishing. Our job now is to get them ready to go back into society. And the only way to do that is to treat them well and give them opportunities to feel safe and to know that they can contribute into the world and to participate in things and to take some responsibility for their own actions. But we were really conscious that the buildings were poor and that the layouts were, most prisons are designed for old men or older men, that's the whole system was. So we had to really think differently and we had to put ourselves in the shoes of young people. So next slide. So we started to think about, and we asked as well, we asked a lot of our young people, what would make a difference and what do you want? And interestingly, one of the things they pretty much everybody said was the most important thing was to have good access to family. So good access and contact with their family members. And that is actually much easier to facilitate than we now have like 4 or 5 visit options a day. People can come in, people can stay over, families, if you're, depending on what stage you are in your process or what your risk levels are, you can stay with your family in the flat that's on site. And we have seen a massive reduction in violent incidences and self-harm since we have introduced these kind of practices. And we also have seen a big reduction in our reoffending rate. So we were full in Woodlands and full in Hydebank, 10 years ago, and now we've reduced our numbers down from 48 to, I think we have 7 yesterday in our under 18 facility, and we've gone from 260 to 38 boys in our under 25 facility. So the changing the buildings, but also the culture and the way we interact with young people and treat them as young people and not adults who've done, or not even as people who've done bad things, but just people who find themselves to be in this environment at this time. So I think a lot of the things that Danny covered, lighting is really key, comfort, mattresses. We've just completed a big research project on this, and mattresses make a massive difference to sleep, and sleep makes a massive difference to behavior, and also learning. We know ourselves, how important sleep is, and there's increasing amount of evidence around that. Lines of sight in buildings, making sure it's so important that children feel safe. Often they haven't come from safe spaces, and they have to learn a little bit what it means to be safe or how to create safety for themselves and others. So there's something about that, but we find that it's very important that staff have really good lines of sight and that young people know that there's people looking out for them. And we also find that big spaces didn't work very well. So these smaller units that we have that are more like your home, 8 people's more than we would want in them, but we rarely have more than 6. And they just feel like sort of comforting, houses where they've got their own kitchen and washing machine area. They do their own washing. They're learning all those skills, as Danny talked about. There's lots of opportunities in the day-to-day tasks that can be just done by themselves that will help them when they leave. And we also we did a lot about language. We've really changed our language. And I think, a bit like the cool down rooms, we no longer have anything like solitary or anywhere. That language is totally gone. If somebody is having a difficult day or getting into fights or stressed, we have spaces where they can go, but they can also ask to go to those spaces. So we're trying to get ahead of that instead of waiting for the incident to kick off, or if somebody's had a bad news from home or a difficult phone call with family, that they can ask to go to these spaces, which are now seen as safe spaces, and they often have much softer facilities. They have places where they can call, they can have access to therapists or counsellors, and that has been really, really helpful. I think it's important that your buildings have good access to exercise. Young people need to move, and this is an issue across the world at the moment because everybody's sitting on their phones, but we really need to, again, I think when we introduced the sort of exercise regimes, and we've done all sorts of things 5K runs, park runs, trying to introduce similar activities that are on the outside that they can connect to on the inside. And we try and do activities at the same time that they would if they were doing them on the outside. So basketball in the evening or different things that they would do in their communities, trying to match as much as possible what they can go back out to. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this is again linking a bit to what Danny talked about in terms of changing our lens and trying to ask. We increasingly ask people when they come in, you know, what is it going to be? What will help you live here safely? What will help you live here well? How do we keep you safe? How do you keep yourself safe? What are you worried about? What do you need us to know about you that can, you know, all those kind of questions that shifts it away from this them being something awful, that us trying to understand them and understand how they got to this moment and what do they need from us to get to a different moment, and giving them some language for some of the things that have happened to them. Okay, moving on. Yeah, so I think the thing I would say about all of this work, what we have learned in the last 10 years, is that it's really important that everyone's on board. We did our buildings first, and then we wondered why it took years and years and years to change anything, but we really just assumed the buildings would do the work for us. And actually, the most important thing we needed to do was work on culture and work on how we, as a team of people who were working alongside our young people, how we respected them, how we gave them choice, how we, what training we got. So all the staff were initially had trauma-informed training, and then we were like, okay, maybe the young people need some of this training. So now all our training, whether it's life support or whether it's suicide awareness, we do together. So the staff do it and so do the young people. And so that also saves all these issues around, well, we can't be released for training because there's not enough staff. So there's never enough staff in these units. So we try and do as much of that together. So it's not an us and them, or we know more, we're experts. It's much more about how do we live in this space well, and how do we create opportunities for people to move on and have better lives. And I think the buildings are important, and they give structure and they create safety. But the most important thing is your culture and making sure that everyone's working on that together and everyone is aware, you know, that all staff, there's this really good communication about the changes and the types of approaches you're going to make. Okay, and then moving on. So we asked our young people, you know, what is the most important thing for you? And you can see there some of the top thing was the contact with families, also access to information. And this relates to language and communication. A lot of the things that we shared with the young people was written in a language that was very judicial and all about the legislative framework that they were sitting in, instead of just in plain, you know, English that made it very straightforward, or their whatever language they speak in. And increasingly we have many languages. So making sure that the information available to young people about how it works here, what is expected of them, what's not expected of them, what will happen if they don't, you know, live up to the expectations, and vice versa, and how they can ask for things or make a complaint or whatever. So I think the communication was really key. And then access to healthcare, that was a huge thing that we have changed dramatically. It used to be really just a medical service, so doctors and nurses, and now we have a much more diverse provision, from speech and language therapists to psychologists to occupational therapists, lots of different types of interventions available for such complex young people. And then you can see some of the other things they suggested that we were able to implement. And I mean, those don't require any buildings. You can do that. Some of our worst facilities have some of the best activities, and that can make the difference. Okay, moving on. So this, I'm not going to go through this, but this was, we have it's a campaign, a public health campaign in Northern Ireland, 5 Steps to Wellbeing for the whole population of Northern Ireland. And we asked our young people, you know, to have a look at it. And they said, well, it's not really relevant. None of it's written for people in the inside. So they created their version for wellbeing in prison. And so it's just so you can see some of the things that they came up with. This is entirely written by the young people in terms of things that will keep them well and can help them stay well. So that's just for your entertainment at another time. Moving on. Okay, so I suppose one of the big challenges, and I'm sure you're facing this, is the public perception, and that there is a sense that we definitely came under heavy criticism in the early days when we had a beautiful building with a swimming pool and garden facilities, and these terrible young people who'd done awful things were being given all these wonderful facilities. And we had to really work against the negative media and the sense that they didn't deserve these kind of things. And in a way, you just have to have a core of people who firmly believe and know that what the research says, which is that this will ultimately improve the safety of your community if you can, change the trajectory of these young people. But it was really challenging in the beginning for us, I have to say. And we just, a lot of people fell off, just couldn't do it. And also we like you, I'm sure too, had staff who weren't sure about this approach and were from another time and saw punishment as an important thing in had a different mode. So there's a kind of changeover of staff at this stage when you're starting to look at regulation and the introduction of regulation. And while regulation is the bane of our lives, I have to say, it's also the best thing. We now work in it. We use an improvement methodology alongside our regulators to regularly look. And at the end of my presentation, I've put up a number of the reports that you can just look at, which if you look at them over time, you can see how their approach has changed with us as we have started to improve in terms moving away from you're not doing it right and you need to do this to this is how we can work together to improve the facilities or to think about the future for how we provide services for young people. There are lots of challenges along the way, but I think and this is where your kind of leadership will be key in terms of sticking with the hope for your young people. But I would say that although where we spent the most money, yes, we have these beautiful buildings, but I want to say again that the most important thing is the culture, because the staff will be the thing that makes the #1 difference to the young people who live there. That's the people they will remember, not so much the building. Okay. So yeah, so that's really the end of my presentation. The very last slide is just a lot of documents that give you links to our regulators and some of the projects work that we've done, and a little bit on psychologically informed environments. But our regulation is the Criminal Justice Inspectorate in Northern Ireland, and they have a lot of different reports about young people's facilities, and we're moving away from a bit. We've been on a sort of long journey, and now we're just about to move away completely from kind of justice for under 18s. There will be no sentencing for that population, hardly at all, and it's just going to be an integrated secure care facility. So it sounds a little bit like what you're developing, and the hope is that very soon no under 18 will be given a criminal record, because we know again that the evidence says that kind of sets them on a trajectory, and we want to move away from that and look at an entirely sort of therapeutically informed process for young people who commit crimes. So that's me. I'm sorry if I went over time. It's hard to do everything, Tim.
Thank you so much. And Elisa will jump in, but I want to let everybody know, I want to thank you so much to both of you, and we'll be posting the PowerPoints that were shared with us. We'll post them on our website as soon as we get a chance after this meeting as well.
Thanks. I just wanted to really thank both Rachel and Dr. Soto and for those really excellent presentations. Allison, do we have time for a few questions from the subcommittee?
I don't see why not. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists?
I had a question. Hello, Ezekiel Nishiyama speaking. Thank you to the panelists for presenting. I definitely think it was a very informative presentation. I learned a lot in just a little 10 minutes. One question I had, and any of the panelists could have a feedback for this question, is within the facility, how do you handle or award incentives versus consequences for the youth when when any behavior type of situations occur.
I'm happy to take that, Danny, since because we work in the facilities. We in Northern Ireland again, we used to have where young people would come in and they'd start at a very low level, you know, so really basic rooms with very little access to TV, and then we would build it up as they over time, and then they would sort of learn, and then those things would be taken away. We've now kind of flipped that over, where young people arrive into quite a nice environment, nice room, access to TV. They have, you know, game activities, different things. And so I suppose we operate a kind of system of a bit like parenting, you know, where there's some telling off. There's like, this is not okay. We need to talk to each other, and if their behavior escalates, then we can move them into different units. There's opportunities for separation, but we try. The staffing levels are quite high, and it's a bit like peer. You know, if one person is going to lose out, then everybody's going to lose out, you know. So there's a sort of, they get a bit of peer pressure about, oh, come on, you know, we all want to watch this TV show, or we all want to do sport this afternoon. So there's a kind of pressure. We try and create more of a softer conversation around things. But again, we've worked a lot on de-escalation. So trying to get ahead of things, trying to spot using, you know, if you know a young person hasn't had a good night's sleep or has had a difficult phone call, preparing for that, you know, getting ahead of that, and also a lot of peer support. So for the young people that we have who are there longer, we do a lot of work with them and training them. It's called a listening program. So they're able to give support to their peers, and gives them a role and responsibility, but also they can have a much faster impact in settling somebody down. So that's some of the things we do.
Thank you. So it's like mainly the collaborative effort that makes the environment a lot more better, much more welcoming or comfortable for the young people that are there.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Roberto Luca. I saw the picture of the room where it showed the ones that you say that you give them an opportunity to choose the color scheme of the room. Could you help me like better understand what is the configuration like of the room, maybe the size, and also is there a bathroom in there? Is there, like, what's the configuration with the toilet and the sink? Like, if you can describe that or help.
Sure. I actually don't know exactly the sizes. That's something I need to find out. I'm not very good with the actual size, but it's a decent size single room. It has an ensuite within it. So the toilet and the shower are separate, but within the same space. So it's your toilet's not in your bedroom. That's something we really wanted to get away from with our young people. Even in our adult prisons now, where we don't have that, the toilet's in a separate space. But everything is anti-ligature, you know, so it's very safe in those spaces, so that they can shut the doors and we don't need to worry about them. But we do have a couple of rooms that would have signs of life technology. So if we have somebody we're really worried about, rather than having to monitor them physically all the time and be very invasive or wake them up every 10 minutes for a check, we use signs of life technology, which means that if they stop breathing, if there's any change, then the alarm automatically goes off. And that has been a big game changer in terms of, because it's a fine line between waking somebody up every 5 minutes and giving them the possibility of feeling better through rest. So yeah, that's I was just going to say that obviously the walls you can't change because of the turnover of young people is so high, but you can change things like curtains are very easy to change, and we have a supply of different things, or bedding covers. they can bring their own if they want to. But also there is one of the activities on the site. We have a car mechanic workshop, a ceramic workshop, a recording studio. It's an incredible facility. But one of the rooms also has a sewing room, so they can make things if they want to, and we try and give them opportunities to personalize their spaces as much as possible.
I have one more follow-up question. And then this is more just maybe out of curiosity, how do you define a secure facility? You said earlier that the public was wary of these measures you were taking, and like there's these kids that did these terrible things. They need to be in secure facilities, and I think that's the number one concern, right, of the public, is that wherever they're at, that it is a secure facility. But so how do you define secure facility?
Well, it's entirely locked. I mean, they can't leave it. It's got a very high wall, but again, we don't use even the wall it's not, there's no barbed wire. No, it's not aggressive looking. The wall is slightly curved, which means it's not possible to climb. But it looks quite nice because it's kind of rounded at the top, but it's you couldn't possibly escape from it. But it doesn't, from the outside, you know that it's a secure building, but from the inside, it doesn't feel like a prison.
Right. And for the other guests, really quickly, I'm wondering what is how important is like recreation to the youth, to our young people, to children? And I'm talking about like outside recreation versus inside, I don't know, like a programming or like watching TV. Like really, what are the differences between somebody sitting and watching TV for 2 hours or going outside and exercising on grass?
I think this is something that we noticed immediately with the new facility, because our old facility didn't have any outside space. Having access to fresh air, the ability to move your body, to hear, birds, some kind of anything like that. But also in our inside space, we have some, chickens, and there's a section for some small animals which they take responsibility for, and they can grow some vegetables, different things. Just engaging in nature, but being outside fresh air is so important. I think it's really, yeah, you'll see. And also there's a de-escalation happens just by being outside. I think when you're in a small contained space, you feel there's that sense of that. As soon as you go outside, there's something, especially if you can see the sky, if there's some kind of space above your head, I think it gives young people an immediate sense of calm just being outside. So sometimes if one of our young people is really having a difficult time, just going into the central area, because I don't know if you saw in the pictures, but the unit is round. It's an entirely sort of, all the units are on the outside, and the inside area is where all the grass and kind of sports activities. We have indoor sports halls and a swimming pool and different things as well, but there's a kind of circular area, and all of the units look into that. So while each unit has maybe 6 or 8 young people in it, when they go to the education, they might all be together. Or you might, if you choose, because the school's on the 2nd floor, so the 1st floor is the accommodation and the schools, you go somewhere else to go to school every day or to go to your apprenticeship. So as I said, there's a car mechanic workshop. We have, it's really, it's not, it's nearly 20 years old, this facility. It's not brand new anymore, but it has a lot of really great, a kitchen, that like Danny talked about, where people can make food that's their own, and they can, if they're, again, we'll take them outside the facility and go shopping in the local shopping center and bring them back, so they can choose their own items. And the local area now knows us, so they see me. I'm not in uniform. The kids aren't uniform. They just wear, we don't have any kind of uniforms here for anyone in prison anymore in Northern Ireland, even adults. We've moved away from a uniform system. But they know the staff, because it's a small place. Everybody knows everybody, and it's very relaxed now. It wasn't like that. People were extremely nervous at the beginning, but it's much more relaxed now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Rachel. Kalisa Rochester. I'm the Chief Probation Officer for Merced County. I do have a question about your comment to Roberto about signs of life technology. What does that consist of?
That's a good question. I know exactly how it works, but it's a monitor on the ceiling. It's very small, and it's just a technology that is designed. It was first introduced in Northern Ireland in our custody suites in the police force when people were being arrested, and sometimes we're spending a couple of nights, and it was really around suicide prevention. And they noticed a big drop off in completed suicides in their custody suites, and so we introduced it into just a number of, it's not in every room, but it's just if we need it, they introduced it. It's in both the adult prisons and for the young people. But actually we haven't, I said this the other day when I was talking to Ellis, I'm scared to say it out loud, but we haven't had a completed suicide of an under 25 for a very long time now. Years and years and years. I couldn't tell you when the last time it happened. So we don't really need it anymore, but it's as soon as someone stops breathing, the alarm goes off. So you have an immediate way to respond.
Okay, thank you very much.
Another, this is Catherine Lucero, the director of OICR, and another of my colleagues mentioned that youth are able to badge themselves in and out of different spaces within the college setting, and previously they had to be escorted everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about that for a moment?
Yeah, and this is probably more in our kind of 18 to 21-year-old facility, but yes, it used to be that everyone was escorted, especially the more high risk offenders, the young people who were in for murder or something more serious. They were escorted with often 2 officers. So if they were coming from their unit across to the healthcare wing, they were just all being escorted. And it actually felt, when I first started to work there, sort of 10 years ago, it felt quite high risk because there was officers everywhere and people everywhere, and it felt but we had real issues with staffing at that time, partly because it was such a terrible facility, and so we had to think differently, and we started to look at risk assessing individuals and who was absolutely necessary for somebody to come with 2 officers, and first step was to reduce it down to 1, and then we realized actually that felt safer in a weird way for everyone, and then we were some of the people who were doing well, we decided to see whether they could travel independently from unit to unit, and they just have we use different lanyards, different colors, so if somebody's wearing a green, that they're on their way to healthcare, and that's where, if they're not going to healthcare, you can. So there's all this sort of, but it's very low key how we and it's only obvious to staff. But since we introduced that, we've moved away. It used to be sort of 20% were moved freely and everybody else was escorted, and now it's more like 3% are escorted. I mean, it's just nobody's hardly escorted, and it's only the only people that are escorted are people who are brand new in and maybe have come, are in for murder, and so, or a very violent attack, or assault or whatever. And we also have our girls and boys together now, which was the next step of that, and that has been a big game changer for us. It takes a lot of work to keep that safe, but it's much more normal for the young people to have access to everyone that they would normally have access to in their own communities. So, and to give them the skills to treat people with respect and learn to live well with each other.
Anything else from any of the committee members? Joni?
I just want to say I really appreciate this presentation, and every single sentence that Rachel says, I have 1 million questions. I'm just floored. I mean, I just think it's amazing. You guys,
you're very welcome to come.
Oh, yes. Can I?
Yeah,
maybe we
please.
could all go on a
Allison.
tour. That sounds amazing. I mean, what I was going to suggest is, how about we just get a copy of their regulations and see? I mean, one thing I'd really like to see is when you're talking about a culture shift, how do you do that? And when you're talking about, you're relying on staff communication, like, how do you do that? I mean, it's got to be written down somewhere. And can we just get what they have written down and kind of work off of that a little bit? Or let's all go on a trip to Ireland. I'm okay with that too. But thank
Yeah,
you so much. I really found your presentation really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy. I mean, I am actually more geared to the 18 plus population, but my clinical background is the under 18s. But the director of the juveniles or the young people's center, whatever you want to call it now, is a guy called Paul. He'd be more than happy to be in contact. And as I say, I think I put it at the end of my presentation, I put up some links to some of the standards in Europe and in the UK for young people's facilities. They're changing all the time. I was reading your standards, the 24, and they're much more detailed in some ways than ours. And I think it would be interesting to talk to some of our regulators maybe about what they're looking for and how do they do that. And again, our director who's for regulations within the prison system here would be more than happy to link with anybody. Yeah, I think we've had regulation for so long. It's actually nearly. I think our regulations used to be much more detailed, but they say less now. It's interesting, but I think as time goes on and certain things become the norm, the focus will become much more on how people spend their day, what how do we look at their mental health and well-being, and the focus of transition back out. I mean, the big thing is how do we help these young people live in the world again, and like the Norwegians would talk about how do we create safe neighbors, how do we create somebody who's going to go out and be a great neighbor. And we've done a lot of work with Norway in terms of the way we model. So, but I think I'm coming out to California next year with Bree Williams to do some work. So hopefully I'll get to see some of you guys then.
All right. Well, I think that we have definitely gone over the time, but it's been so enriching. Thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Soto and Rachel. And I will, and Elisa, thank you for arranging this. And we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll get ready to jump into the work. Do we need a break or are we just kind of, I'll check in. Break. I hear break. So we'll take a 10-minute break. It's 2:20. We'll start back again at 2:30. And the restrooms straight out, go all the way till you can't go anymore and turn left. And the code is 1903 pound. Thank you.
Where Ezekiel is maybe we need a bell or something. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to get started. It's 2:35, so we were able to have a bit of a break. Allison, I think you were going to introduce this section in a moment. We're still waiting for people to sit down.
Oh, no. Oh, good. Thank you, everybody, for coming on back. A break is always good for our brains. We're going to get into the work here today. I wanted to go over a couple of things. How we're going to accomplish our goal today, much like our meeting in Holy Toledo, I think that was May. Same general format. We'll brainstorm. We'll have the Title 24 regulations in order to go through to use as a guide as we go through seeking your input on concepts that should be in the Title 24 regulations. We are going to try to stay away from drafting specific regulations and language. That is what BSCC staff will do based on the discussion here. And hopefully everybody has had a little bit of a chance to digest the Title 24 regulations. They're a lot less massive than the Title 15 regulations. I also want to provide some really important reminders about Title 24. They are the standards for design and construction of local juvenile detention facilities. Where Title 15 is operational in nature and they're mostly performance-based. When Title 15 is revised and adopted, they're immediately effective and they apply to everyone at all times. You can't go back in time, but if you could, they would be effective retroactively. And Title 24 is a little bit different. Again, it deals with both the design and the actual construction of local juvenile detention facilities. There's two parts. If you're looking at the regulations, you will see Part 1 and Part 2. It doesn't say it specifically, but the 13201 section is called Part 1. It's administrative in nature. It talks about and gives guidance on how to begin to build a local juvenile detention facility. It talks about the BSCC responsibility for conducting plan review, doing a needs assessment, an operational program statement. What an operational program statement is that it is a statement of what that facility's program and policies may look like once this facility is constructed. Also talks about things like design requirements, lists a whole host of items that need to be included in design requirement, concepts that need to be in place before the drafting for the actual physical plans begin. The most important one, I think, in there is the design criteria for suicide prevention. There's a list of items that can't be built in a facility so we can mitigate the risk of self-harm to young people. So as an aside, the BSCC is required to review every single set of plans for construction. If it's a brand new building, we have to review, it gets kind of boring, but there's different levels of plan review that we need to do when the sketches are pretty basic. And then ultimately when they're called construction documents are drawn, and those are the actual things that are actually going to be built in the facility. The BSCC needs to review each of those at 3 different phases for compliance with Title 24. We also need to review any construction at a facility that exceeds $15,000, which is incredibly easy to do. I don't think you can install a toilet in a detention facility for less than $15,000. So essentially how we communicate with our agencies is that if you have a construction project, big, small, massive, not so massive, we require a letter of intent so the BSCC can determine what level of plan review needs to happen. So Part 1, administrative, design requirements, operational program statement. Part 2, which is in the 1230 section, it's called Part 2. That is where you'll see actual measurements for space and specific design requirements, like how much square footage is in a sleeping room, what furnishings need to be provided, a bed, showers, toilets, those types of things. We talk about privacy and safety. It's interesting, mattresses come up an awful lot. There is a Title 24 requirement for beds and size. The requirements for mattresses are actually located in Title 15. And I'll talk about that in a minute, mostly because it falls into sanitation, hygiene, and state fire marshal regulations. There's really strict requirements for material that is in a young person's room. They need to adhere to state fire marshal regulations for for the types of secure facilities that are built for juvenile detention facilities. One of the most important pieces of Title 24 is that it's not applied retroactively. So the regulations that we revise today are not applied to facilities that are already in existence. And that is not a BSCC regulation. It's actually in the state building standards code. So that's really important to remember here as we're talking about perhaps some aspirational standards for what a secure youth treatment facility would look like. We cannot say that an existing facility has to have the concepts that we talk about today. Really, really, really super important. Also, the Building Standards Commission takes sometimes up to 3 years to publish and adopt Title 24 standards. It's nothing to do with the BSCC processes or policies. So Title 15 and Title 24 are going to be finalized at the same time. Title 15 will take a lot less time. Title 24 can take up to 3 years. So the standards that are talked about today for buildings that are built in the future may not be effective for about 3 years. And it's just the reality of the building standards. An existing facility doesn't necessarily need to, and I talked about this, Title 24 isn't retroactive, and an existing facility that does construction doesn't necessarily need to come up to the latest least restrictive standards. There is a definition of a remodel. When a facility changes structural components of a facility, an agency might be required to come up to the latest least restrictive standards of Title 24. But the BSCC looks at those as a case-by-case basis. There are often questions about, well, if it was a facility built many, many, many years ago and they want to make the rooms bigger by knocking down the wall in between the 2 rooms, that would be considered a remodel. That facility would need to adhere to the latest, least restrictive Title 24 standards. They'd need to come up to more current standards. On the other hand, if a facility wants to replace something, the beds were broken, and say the beds were built in, I'm going to make up a ridiculous number. The beds only had to be 2 feet wide at that time. The beds were broken. They want to replace the beds with the same frame that was effective back then. They don't need to come up to the latest least restrictive standards because they're replacing with like an in-kind. They're not changing facility components. It can get kind of frustrating. Again, it's building standards code and how it works. And we're happy to walk through any of those situations as they come up. Juvenile detention facilities also need to adhere to state fire marshal standards and to ADA standards. They are completely and wholly separate from the BSCC standards. So we also coordinate. We don't coordinate with ADA. Those are federal standards. The county agency is required to make sure that they're ADA compliant when they do their plan review. But the state fire marshal also comes in and reviews the plans for any construction to make sure that they meet the Title 19 standards as well. So all that to say, we're going to talk about what concepts could be included in a future SYTF facility. It is a time to be aspirational because the facilities that are going to be built with these standards don't necessarily exist today. And I wanted to point that out. Does anybody have any questions on Title 24 physical plant standards?
Okay, no preliminary questions before we dig in. Okay, so I think the BSCC staff was going to actually put the regulations on the screen, and you also have them in your folders. Probably have them on your computers too. So lots of places to look. And I'm also hopeful that you've all reviewed them and you're coming to us with your notes, your ideas, and if also you're brainstorming about stuff we've heard today and wanting to add these aspirational features. as Allison said, the staff will be taking notes. I actually have mine in writing, so I'll be submitting them. So, you know, if you have something in writing you want to submit, so the staff captures your comments, please do that. So we'll go ahead and just go step by step through I think the 3 different phases. And the first, that being is it the needs assessment?
It's actually the exclusions. This is the exclusions portion of the Title 24 that talks about what I said, that the facility that's built doesn't need to come up to later at least restrictive standards unless the facility administrator determines that there is a danger to the health and welfare of youth. This is an administrative regulation that is aligned with the Building Standards Commission. And again, it excludes facilities from having to come up to a later least restrictive standard as regulations are changed.
So it is then not in our purview to amend this section, correct?
Correct. We couldn't change it to say you have to adhere to the latest least restrictive standards, correct?
Okay. So then probably we shouldn't have a big discussion about this portion unless we could actually impact it.
Probably not.
Because I'm sure everyone has an opinion about it. Aaron, we're not able to impact this section, correct?
Not the retroactivity.
Okay.
That's statutory.
And that's probably the main part that would all be wanting to change. Okay. So, so then should we go into the initial planning section? And who wants to get started with, I'm also happy to take any comments that you might have, because this is a relatively short title compared to 15. So I'm happy to even go around our membership here in the room and just hear from you on any suggestions you have, because that might be more efficient. So does Joni want to start, or does the deputy chief from San Bernardino want to start?
If I go first, does that mean I get to go last too? Like it goes full circle?
I'm
kidding.
We can have a second try. We can have a second, I mean,
I was joking.
sure.
Well, some of the things that I was looking at, you just starting at, say, I did really appreciate the presentation that we had today, because it actually didn't occur to me that we could be looking for things like ensuite bathrooms, because that makes a lot of sense. And having a toilet in your bedroom is horrible. So that is my first request, single occupancy rooms. And if there could be ensuite bathrooms, I think that would be great. There were, one of the things that we had talked about last time with Title 15 was like the nature of living in an institutional facility, like a custodial facility, right? That the doors have to be opened in a particular way. This may be a foolish question, but do all the doors actually have to be secured? Like for kids who are living in a secure facility for, say, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. I mean, I understand, kids who are there initially, let's say, or kids who are there at the beginning of getting treatment. But if you have a kid who's been receiving treatment in the facility, who, has matured, who's had therapeutic interventions, who has, whose behavior has been really well, like, can we have a portion of the facility that isn't quite as restrictive as the rest of the juvenile facility? And I think that, one portion of that might be thinking about, maybe rooms that don't with large metal doors that kind of clang shut and lock behind you, or large metal doors where you have to kind of stand in front and wait for a institutional officer to press a button and you hear it unlock. And I think that kind of goes into what Dr. Soto too was saying about noise and environment and things like that. I don't know, we're talking big ideas, right? We don't have to wordsmith things, which is not my forte, but I would, something like that. If a portion of the facility, maybe not all of it, but a portion of it could be kind of with an eye towards kids who have been working towards release, and really doing this in an incremental fashion as opposed to having kids locked in a cell and then having the choice be so, black or white like that, or so clear, locked in a cell and then out, but something a little bit more open.
I just want to jump in there. I know I'm looking over at our probation colleagues. There are facilities where not all the doors are locked for young people. I know some of the camps probably. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that too.
So at our secure youth facility, we have leveling systems. So I think she mentioned they do a little bit different when the youth first come in and then they change their ways. But as our youth level up, they have much more freedom. And one of the things is keeping their doors unlocked all day so they can go in and out as they choose. One thing that I did write down when I listened to that, to the lady speak, is about the sound that even as a former correctional officer, that sound of doors closing, they don't rattle me, but I notice it rattles everybody else when they come in if they're new to the facility. And so I wrote a big note to myself to let me see what we can do about that, because it is it can be traumatic. Yeah. But yeah, freedom to have their doors open is not a problem unless there is a problem.
Yeah, it just sounds like for some of the facilities that there's a workaround to a door that closes automatically as opposed to doors that don't close automatically. Do you know what I mean? Like a big metal door that you like prop open is open during the day, but that's different from a door that doesn't automatically lock behind you with a metal thing. And I don't know, maybe that's just a suggestion. In terms of, family engagement areas, like larger areas where youth can engage with their families and not in a visiting room situation where you're kind of looking at each other for an hour, but something where people can do pro-social activities together and be together in like a positive kind of way that it seems to me requires a lot more space, space to accommodate younger siblings and maybe even children. So things with toys or softer areas, things where you can do. And I know DJJ used to have like barbecues and stuff like that. So things like that, like activities that families can do together as a community, that, so like that, like a larger area like that. Oh, I thought somebody over there was going to say something.
I was just gonna say, there, like at our facility, we do have larger areas. We kind of have that gift of space where we host family movie nights. And so I think that, and it's outdoors, and so we kind of have blankets or whatever the family would like, that makes them comfortable. But I think we do have the ability to soften our spaces without having to have it, written. It's more about the program piece of it and how it feels. I mean, it's difficult to make a facility not feel like a facility, but I think if you have meaningful program and the ability for families to engage in a pro-social way, I think that is super helpful. I would agree.
Well, I'm really, whenever somebody tells me we have this already, I think that's amazing. Every facility in California should have that. And I think it's great that, your probation department can prioritize that and has the space for that. But if we're talking about regulations that are going to be required for all facilities throughout California, then I want all facilities to do that and not just the ones that happen to be in your area, and so, and I think it should be, really what Rachel Gibbs was saying, that the goal is like a college campus that just happens to be secure. That's amazing. I think we should do that. With large kind of outdoor areas and the opportunity to do to work on different types of vocational skills. That they have a coffee shop that's staffed by youth is amazing. And that
I just want to say we did see a couple of counties that have a very similar barista program, more like a food truck situation, but pretty clever. Yeah.
That's great. Then all the counties should have that. Like every youth who's in it. I mean, look, I really want a secure youth treatment facility to be for youth who have faced really serious charges, who risked being transferred to adult court. So we're talking about really serious charges, that those youth should be in a facility where they're having the opportunity to engage with family and build community support, and then also have vocational training and education and rehabilitation. And so it's great that we have progressive, probation chiefs who really focus on that. And I think that's great. But, my understanding is we're here to make sure like everybody has the same. Yes. So areas for vocational training then. And that requires larger space and larger areas. And I would hope too, it would be multiple spaces to capture kind of multiple different programming.
Right now, 1230.1. Adequate space for. But I think that could be more specific. Absolutely.
And I think it should be multiple if
Mhm.
possible.
Mhm.
We should be trying to really capture multiple, things that appeal to different kids, because kids have strengths, people have strength in different areas.
Mhm.
And as you say that, I know that there's square footage, and I'm just spatially, that's also not my strength. And so I didn't think really about what that means, so I don't have concrete suggestions in terms of what square footage should be for all this stuff. But I would go with big.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. If anybody else is spatially strengthed, please feel free to throw out square footage.
I am not, but we can certainly look and even reach out to Rachel too and just get a sense of what's out there. We have if you look at page 26, the formula for physical outdoor spaces, it just makes my brain shut down because there's math required. And it's, dependent on the number of youth in the facilities, but perhaps maybe even we could look around and see what best practices say for space for outdoor, space for multi-purpose rooms, space for other program areas. And one of the things, going back to the operational program statement, what's helpful and why the operational program statement is important, and all these regulations kind of feed into one another, is because if the operational program statement says that you're going to have a vocational program and you're going to have a family engagement center, then what we're going to be looking for in plan review is what are those spaces? So it helps define the space, but what's not, further back in Title 24 is just like a multi-purpose space that is so many square feet. So we'll dig around and look at some best practices, maybe not with so many numbers. And we can also look at facilities that are built and have spaces. There really are some really incredible spaces in some of these facilities. I know it's not the ideal place to have a multi-purpose space, but there is space for family and youth to congregate and participate in programs. So we'll look into some best practices as well.
I did also really like the idea of youth having badges and being able to, not all youth, but eventually being able to unlock doors and have a little bit of control like that. And maybe that goes into like the secure door thing and the non-secure door. That was just something that I hadn't thought about before the presentation today, but I did really appreciate that. And just another thought as I was driving in and I was stuck in traffic. my air conditioning is not working. And I was thinking, how, that you have an outdoor space is great, but like when the weather is 100 degrees, how do you utilize that outdoor space? And so, making sure that, outdoor space is accessible and usable, and kind of keeping in mind too, like the climate and climate change kind of as we're going along. I think those were my comments with respect to what I saw in Title 24 as kind of what we were supposed to address. So I will save the rest of my comments for the second round.
Okay. And we should note that we have 2 hours scheduled. We do want to have public comment, plenty of time for public comment. So just be mindful that we do want to hear from each of us. And Joni, I'm not saying that you went on too long. I'm just trying to give us a little bit of structure. Chris.
Sure, Chris Eldridge. And I echo what Joni said. I was telling her at the break that we had a group from, I believe it was Virginia, come out to take a look at our facility because they were going to be building a brand new facility back there. And at the time, the chief was talking to them about really you need a college campus that's secured. So I think that vision or that idea, one of the other things that I was sitting here feeling very lucky is we have a sensory room in Sacramento. It is extremely valuable. So if there is space or some way of kind of writing that in so the kids have a place to go to decompress, I was telling Joni, it was not easy to get implemented. Some of the staff pushed back, but once it was open and running, they saw the value. I'll try to keep it brief.
Wow, that was really brief. I wanted to also be mindful of us identifying that this is specifically for an SYTF youth, or this actually would benefit all youth, just so that staff can be mindful as well. Okay? And that, I think you're probably thinking all youth with that statement.
I would agree.
Yeah, okay. And then I heard a little bit some differences with Joni's comments. Not sure if your comments were applying to just SYTF youth or all youth. And because we're trying to, we're the SYTF subcommittee, so.
I mean, I was thinking about those things, keeping SYTF youth in mind specifically. I think a longer term of incarceration, is really hard on kids. I think it would be great for all kids, but I can see, if probation were to say a youth who is there pre-adjudication, who's only there for 2 weeks, isn't going to get their own badge to unlock doors. That
Sure.
makes sense to me.
Mhm.
So, I'll say that my comments are directed to SYTF youth, but certainly some could be applied to.
Okay, thank you. Roberto.
Yes, I have a kind of just a quick question before I make my comments on some of the structural components of an SYTF in the future. There's the minimum standards for juvenile facilities. I did read that there's a description for camp. There's also a description for juvenile facilities and juvenile hall. And it's very confusing to me what is what. So I don't know if, and then and then I think there's also now the component of a SYTF, and that's gonna probably have its own description. So I think that's.
What page are you?
Are you in the definitions, Roberta?
Yeah, it's the definitions.
So I can answer most of it. Camp facilities are strictly commitment facilities. They are outlined in legislation in the Welfare and Institutions Code in, I think it's 880. Oh, look, it's 881. I should have said that and looked really smart. So camps, probation, and I should probably defer to probation as well, but probation departments develop camp programs in coordination with their boards of supervisors. There needs to be a board of supervisor resolution to build a camp and to run a camp program. And then certainly they're going to work with the courts to work on what that program of commitment looks like. So camps are longer term commitment facilities. How'd I do? Did I do okay?
Yeah.
Juvenile halls, and yes, these are definitions that are, culled mostly from legislation. Juvenile halls, again, there's definitions in the Welfare and Institution Code, but they are for technically pre-adjudicated short-term after, after entrance into the system. And typically, it's not intended to be a long-term facility. There are ways a young person can get committed to a juvenile hall program, but they're typically short. I don't know that that's even happening anymore. But the way you think about a juvenile hall is a short-term pre-adjudicated type facility. And then the SYTF facilities are a whole new type of facility.
But there is a definition in law.
For that.
So,
We're gonna pull that
yeah,
out.
so that'll be put in the definitions.
So then, okay, so then juvenile facilities incorporates everything.
Yes, it's a catch-all. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that help?
Well, yeah, it did, because I was reading under juvenile facilities that they have ranch or camp, and then there's
mhm.
camp, so.
Yeah.
And now we
so-
have SYTF.
And one of the reasons that we have a definition for juvenile facility is that in these regulations, since there are components that apply to all types of facilities, instead of saying one particular type of facility, like if a regulation says each juvenile facility shall have, then it applies to all, rather than a camp shall have or a juvenile hall shall have. So if you see juvenile facility, it means it encompasses all.
So then in the future, under juvenile facility, there'll be a SYTF component, a description there.
Yes.
So for the SYTFs, in the future, I'm really, looking at what like everyday living looks like for the youth, and they spend a lot of time, in their rooms. So I think moving forward, if those rooms could have a natural light, obviously a window, that would be great, and a window that, not that you can fully open, of course not, but that you could maybe just pull. There's different ways of doing that. I know some adult facilities have cells with windows that they can open. And then as far as the construction of, like, in the future, of the sinks and the toilet, if those would be like separated from each other, instead of, like, kind of what we have today. And in the in the day room spaces, I think that they should look more like living rooms. And I think I saw a great example today in their presentation of our presenters, because they had furniture, they had couches, they had a lot of soft furniture in those spaces, with obviously with their TVs. So those are some spaces, and I wanna also say the importance in the future of having spaces for families to come in and have barbecue activities, maybe even like some type of game activities, tennis, just like a really recreational space where family and community can come in. So it'll feel like, that it's a warm environment for our youth and their families, and also an area for children where they can have like plastic toys and things like that while their families are on these visits. I think that's also very important. Vocational and educational spaces, I think Johnny already mentioned. And I had one other component here. Yeah, that there's spaces where, like, you can take a walk, like a garden, just like they showed earlier again in our presentation, where the youth can go and kind of have like a cool down period, these spaces where they can go off to the side and read and things like that. And I think that today we learned something huge, or at least I did, is those suicide alert signal indicate. I think that was like, that's huge. And especially the impact that it's had for them. I think that that's something that we can definitely, I feel that's something that we should do like tomorrow in all juvenile facilities, but that's neither here nor there. But definitely in the future of having those type of therapeutic approaches to things. And I do have one comment aside from my thoughts on the facility itself in the future, is that there's some components to like health and disability, and and sanitation, things like that. And I don't know if we have like an expert here on the panel as far as like what that looks like. But that's something I think we should look at maybe separately. And yeah, that's, oh, one more comment that I'll make, and I promise trying to keep it short, is that, this creation, this new vision, this reimagining opportunity that we're doing, it has nothing to do with the facilities that we have today. This is for our future. And SB 823 is giving us this gift, because it is a gift for us to change the entire dynamic of what we have known in the past to where we are today and where we will be in the future. So I'm excited about it, and I hope that we take this opportunity to create that new vision and that new model. I could get into other crooks and crannies, some of the things that are happening now. There's, you're building SYTFs inside juvenile halls. Some people are building them in camps. Others are creating new structure. We're all over the map. But in the future, moving forward, if we could have one model that's based on best practices, then I think that's what the opportunity we have is to do that. Thank you.
Excellent. Ezekiel?
Roberto took everything I was going to say. He went in a lot. To basically build off of Roberto, I think one thing I got out of the presentation was like the peer leadership piece. And I think Jody touched on it a little bit about understanding, letting youth have the availability to have a badge. And I think building that trust within them, because you see the peer leadership within it. And then other young people, I feel like, just gradually see themselves and take it upon themselves to be leaders themselves once they see other young people. I remember we actually had a peer leadership group in the Pine Grove Fire Camp. And it was also very similar. The facility was very similar to having more flexibility and freedom. You could walk, the door wasn't like, it'd have to be popped by a staff. It was unlocked already. You'd have a staff already out there in the recreation field. So he'd be waiting for you. So once their room is released, you're able to walk freely out, back inside, in and out the dorm, and able to go outside. So it's a lot more freedom. I think the biggest thing out of that facility is when you get there, you notice that there's no type of fence around the facility. I know that is more of a step down, but creating more of those type of environments for our youth, where it's the more incentivized. I think even looking at the types of rooms young people are housed in, as they do better in their program, I think there should be something like an incentive room. Similar to, I remember in DJJ, they did have incentive rooms in OH closed. It was a dorm facility, but they had a few rooms that if you were, I'd say the top 5 youth, you would probably be put in one of those rooms and you'd have your own TV, So making more of a living environment for youth within their rooms, if they are able to access a TV, access a radio, have a bookshelf, have a shelf for their clothes, a writing area for themselves to do poetry or just write letters. I think that should be available for all the young people. And then Roberto touched on it a lot, the family piece, the visitation. I think all facilities should have a separate visitation room that has access to food, that offers a place and time for the youth to really be able to connect with their family. I feel like what I see in LA County is most of the visitation rooms were inside the day room when I was there, and that wasn't. It's very cold for the parents. It's very chilly. It's like chilling. It's just like you get a chills from being inside there as a parent. And you have other young people that aren't getting visits, seeing other parents and the peer and the having visits, and that doesn't just it just doesn't feel good being locked down in a room knowing you're not gonna get a visit. So that's why your punishment is staying in your room. I think definitely on the suicide hazard piece, the signs of life monitoring with all the overdoses that have been occurring throughout California is definitely, a lot of tragedy and a lot of trauma that affects both the youth and the staff that are there in the day room. It sucks that the only tools that we have is 15-minute checks, and that's the most we can do is a 15-minute check every now and then understanding that we might be 160 seconds too late for the young person to be saved. And our young people are playing with fire that they don't know what they're playing with. They're playing with fentanyl and drugs that are very just causing a lot of pain and trauma to our young people inside. And I think it's just a coping mechanism, and it is very hard for them to say no to those type of substances in a facility like that, especially since they are so young. Some of them actually don't know what they're playing with, Let me see. I think also the green spaces, giving young people just something to not feel like it's such a lockdown facility. If you look at Campus Kilpatrick, for example, it's in the hills of Malibu. It's very open, green space, a lot of just nature around the facility. And you could feel it. It has a lot more fresh air compared to a facility like Barry J, where you don't see out the facility. I remember myself, LP, for example, there was a golf course next to the facility, and I used to look out my window, and it did give me some type of sanity, seeing that view outside my window. I actually lost that view. The staff moved me to the view that looked at the inside of the facility, and it did mess up my mind looking at the inside of the facility all day. I remember that day I refused to go to the other side of the room because I knew I was going to lose my view. So more just that giving young people something to look forward to, I think all of us as young people, we see ourselves in a different light, see ourselves for a better future. It's just a lot of support needed to get ourselves there and out of that lifestyle that we put ourselves in the first place. And I think the college settings, I think, how do we get towards that where it doesn't even have to be a secure college, for example? I think right now we have a lot of young people that are deeply into their studies, that are achieving their bachelor's, associate's degrees, exploring different college opportunities. So how do we pull away from it being a secure college and a locked facility to being more flexible and young people in SYTF transitioning to college campuses and that being part of their SYTF confinement time? If they could step down to a college opportunity with a scholarship, and be assisted by a probation officer, credible messenger, someone that's going to support them along the way, that doesn't necessarily have to hold their hand the whole time there, but just check in with them, make sure they're doing everything that they're supposed to, make sure they're keeping up with their studies, their grades, and monitoring that. Because I've seen it. I've seen a lot of young people currently in the juvenile halls, exploring different college campuses, exploring scholarships. And we recently had one young person who got accepted to, I think it was either UC Berkeley or Santa Barbara. And he was actually sentenced to SYTF, but released early by the judge to go to college because he actually had a flight set up to visit the college campus. And they were like, well, why are we gonna fly you out and have you, still locked up when we could just step you down and you could go to the college as a, I don't know, is it free? Kind of free. We're all kind of free. But having that freedom, I think, is very important for the young people. And if they're very motivated, I believe that they should explore that. And also, with that, this will be my last thing, excursions. I think something that we miss for our young people is showing them the different opportunities, showing them different environments outside of the small blocks we confine ourselves to. Giving the young people just a tour of college campuses across California. We have so many college campuses that aren't secure. So we should really just show the young people like what a college campus looks like. And I think it'll be very motivating for them to see that, get that experience, get a tour, interact with a lot of college leaders, teachers, professors. And then with that, I think just yeah, really building on the peer leadership piece, though, giving more young people flexibility to have a lot of leadership and help build each other up as young people. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have, as I said, I have worked on this a little bit with lots of help, lots of really great support. So I'm just going to read off what I have and I will submit it to the staff. Specifically looking at initial planning, I think this is an important element of the regulations that could be developed during a needs assessment. For example, we should involve engagement with the community, including young people with recent or current experience in the juvenile system. This is something that Vera and Milpa have worked on. We should include educational stakeholders in the needs assessment, include behavioral health stakeholders. We should also include a description of the youth population and should account for specifically youth with high needs in the needs assessment. With regard to the operational program assessment, each facility should need to explain how it supports the healing of young people who could potentially live there for up to 7 years and how that facility will support programming. The program statement should involve community engagement. Trauma-informed rehabilitative goals should be structuring the operational program and how the facility design will support positive youth-staff relationships. It should outline the behavioral health aspirations and college and vocational programs and K through 12 programs that it will encompass. And this is all aspirational, so I'm just making sure that we don't forget that, this is a move forward, hopefully trauma-informed place. Training to improve culture from that correctional lens to the wellness lens, I think would have to be for all government stakeholders, which naturally includes probation, but also behavioral health, county offices of education, medical, really anybody that touches the youth inside that facility. Sometimes I think we forget that there's a lot of people raising the youth in the facility. Probation is definitely I call it the spoke on the wheel. But they also have to rely on a lot of other partners. With regard to design requirement, I think there should be an inclusion of key features of the trauma-informed spaces for youth and staff. Review, revise, and expand the current sections to require the design of the juvenile facility to address the following principles: reducing environmental stress, enable positive relationships between youth and staff by supporting good communication and a sense of safety. Acoustics, we've heard that already about noise reduction throughout the facility. Door slamming is a big one. It is what is currently the design, is a lot of door slamming. Mental health spaces should be designed in, providing normative and educational experiences where possible, providing access to outdoors, vegetation, not just concrete, supporting that family engagement through that design. We've heard a lot already about natural light in the bedroom, but also it should be in the day rooms and in cafeterias. Windows in the bedroom should be kept in a way that it doesn't disturb sleep, but we do want natural light, but we also want to make sure that youth sleep is not disturbed, especially when we're looking at SYTF. I mean, these really long-term stays. I mean, OYCR is really committed to helping with stepping down to less restrictive programs, but we know that there will be youth that do have to be separated. And it is ultimately that youth that we're really wanting to have that comfortable and trauma-informed setting. The fresh air, I heard, about fresh air today being trauma-informed. And then we do think that youth should have a choice in an ideal world between a bathroom in their room versus a suite style. Some youth want their own ability to be in their room. And there are a lot of youth who feel like having to depend on somebody to leave a locked door to use the restroom is not necessarily ideal. With regard to spaces and equipment, 1230.1, the approach would be here are what we believe minimally SYTS should have. And that would be, I think, I know that there's padded rooms described here, but we would want it to be more of a de-escalation room. Adding rooms that are trauma-informed, which can be very different than some of the other ordinary rooms, although ideally every room would be a trauma-informed space, but making sure that rooms, at least there are some spaces allocated. Add spaces for staff to work with youth. We would add at least 2 more confidential interview rooms to the minimum standards. Also for an SYTF, we would add single subject classrooms and at least 1 college level learning space. At least 2 office co-location rooms for mental health, drug and alcohol, credible messengers, social services, DOR, and other critical partners. At least 1 room available and furnished with child-friendly furniture, books, toys, and a diaper change table. We would ask for 6 to 8 rooms per unit or per pod. We heard that today, that was important. We'd also ask that a culinary center be established in every SYTF, a kitchen with learning opportunities, shared meals. Sharing, meals is important, and fresh food is important. And we know that there are a lot of facilities that have really awesome kitchens, but there are some barriers to having those be used at this time, everything from staff shortages to other barriers. So I acknowledge that, but on a move forward basis, I think every SYTF would have a culinary center for learning and for shared meals. Dining rooms that are located away from the pod. When a youth can leave to eat and go to school, I think that that's the healthiest possible way to raise a young person. And that is what is happening. That young person is being raised in this space. Gymnasiums and multi-purpose rooms should be required. Libraries or learning spaces with separate that are separate from classrooms. We saw an amazing library in Sacramento with a librarian who is just fully involved in helping the youth write and read and create all kinds of creative alternatives. And it really is impressive when we see these libraries. Green spaces without overhead cyclone fences, ability to, enjoy a green space or an outdoor space without an overhead blocking. Gardens, raised bed gardens or traditional gardens. Again, day rooms should be equipped with kitchenettes for the youth to use after school so they can make their own snacks. Fully wired learning spaces equipped with computers for learning opportunities. Family rooms with the ability for overnight stays with the youth. And spiritual spaces such as church, sweat lodges, temples, drumming, and other spiritual practices. And then design criteria for furnishings and equipment. We think what's missing for SYTF and should be more youth-centered would be the lighting. The seating should be comfortable, movable, soft textures. We are seeing that throughout the state. There's a huge effort to make the seating more comfortable, and that should be a minimum standard. Desk and bookshelves in the bedrooms. Mirrors that one can see themselves in. We've seen mirrors where you really can't see yourself. And then we've seen mirrors where youth are so excited for the first time after maybe being moved from another section to be able to see their reflection. And that really impacted me. One youth said that when he looks good, he acts good, he feels good. That's a pretty low threshold, is a mirror that you can see yourself in. And then adding that security fencing should not have visible barbed wire. There are ways to accomplish secure fencing without barbed wire, and we've seen it around the state. And it's I know it costs. I know a lot of county general services that it gets put on the bottom of the pile. Unfortunately, just because of all the demands of county contracts. And I know that more facilities are looking to use rollers and other alternatives. So I would ask that that also be a minimum standard. And I'll pass it over to Kelly.
That was very comprehensive. Okay, so I kind of approached these as thinking about if we really do want to make these spaces into college campuses, like what actually do we need? And I think a big part of that is that you need classrooms, right? And you need to be specific that you need classrooms in addition to classrooms where high school completion is being held. If you're asking students to really think of themselves as college students, that probably means at least 2 college classrooms in a new facility, right? Additionally, we know that when the nervous system is dysregulated, the part of the brain that regulates learning is turned offline. So the classrooms really do need to be designed in some of the ways that Dr. Soto walked us through, with those 5 senses kept in mind. I think that framework, for me, we could overlay that framework onto all of the different spaces, the rec rooms, the day centers, the dining rooms, right? Obviously, not all of them are going to have the taste component of our 5 senses, but I did like that framework a lot and thought if there was a way to apply it throughout the document, that could be very helpful. So
Joni, I think you and Roberto both touched on this, but we need to ensure that there are enough classrooms and that they're large enough for multiple configurations. So there's been research done in our adult prisons that adults who were in classroom spaces learned best when they were in a U configuration, kind of like we are now, because then they don't have their backs to anyone. And so we helped our colleges who were teaching, they teach over 10,000 adults in prisons, and they don't all do this, but we did provide the guidance that having modular desks that can be moved around and configured to allow for U shapes, to allow for circles, that can go a really long way. Additionally, when we're talking about desks, we want to make sure that we think about providing standing desks as well for our young people who have ADHD or some sort of neurodivergence, where it's really hard for people to learn like that if they're not moving in some way. And so if we can talk about or think about under the desks, include the inclusion of some standing desk options, I think that that would be really beneficial. It is difficult to learn if you are hungry. So one of the things that we could also consider is whether or not in the classroom spaces, snacks could be made available to young people. In classrooms, lighting matters, having plants matters, windows matter, right? Natural light has an impact on our ability to learn. And then allowing these college classrooms to actually be college classrooms, ensuring that they have the right technological hookups, ensuring that they have the right technology, ensuring that the college is allowed to bring in college regalia so that students really understand they are a, CCSF student, or they are a Chabot student, or wherever it may be. So in addition to like having actual classroom spaces for the colleges, there need to be quiet study spaces as well. These spaces need to be not next to a room where there's a TV blaring all the time, right? Not next to maybe a dining hall where there's a lot of noise, but really ensuring that there is a space where students have access to go and complete their homework, right? Because if you think about a college student, only a third of the coursework happens in the actual classroom traditionally. There's so many hours outside of that really involves studying. Ezekiel, you touched on this point, but just asking that people have those soft edge desks in their living quarters where they can also do their homework, where they can write, where they can be creative, where they can feel actually like scholars who have that kind of opportunity to explore their mind and their creativity, I think is really important. Something that we've run into in the prisons is that there is not enough space in some of the prisons for the colleges to store their materials, things like textbook libraries. That's often we see some of our practitioners rolling in carts and rolling them out. It's really burdensome. So as we're designing this and thinking about the college experience in mind, maybe having a small office for the college, the host college, right, who's coming in to store their materials, to meet with students, to have those textbook libraries where they're rotating materials out. That's just been something that we've had a difficult time with at the adult facility. So if we can head it off now, I think that would be wonderful. I really love the idea of where appropriate, youth being able to badge themselves in and out of college spaces. Due to limited staffing in some of our counties, access to college classes has really been hindered by the limited staffing because they cannot get escorts in order to go and participate in their classes. Or when the escort is available, the student is still getting meds and then they miss their opportunity and then they're not in the classroom at all. A couple of non-academic things. I think we've talked a little bit about sleep hygiene. I think that's really important as well. It sounds like the mattresses is in Title 15, but just really applying the science and the research that has come out in the last, 5 or 7 years about how important sleep hygiene is. So making sure that you have a dark enough space, right? Making sure that you're comfortable, making sure that it's quiet. We can't really learn and heal if we're exhausted all the time. And this is, I think, just like a adjacent idea, and I didn't really see a place for it in here, but we're talking about having cool down spaces for young people, right? Like kind of a sensory space where you can go and have that experience. And I just wonder if there is an opportunity, whether it's in here or somewhere else, to think about creating those kinds of spaces for staff as well. I think it's really important. It's like, very important that the staff also is regulated as they're working with young people, because we all are constantly co-regulating. And so if staff are starting to feel dysregulated, I would love for them to also have space where they could go and take care of their own nervous system
Mm.
as well.
Mhm.
I think those are my recommendations.
Excellent. Chief?
So when I think about the SYTF population, one of the things that I think is severely missing in the Title 24 regulations and even in my facility is thinking about um, the older population and how to best serve the older population, because I think that's what's severely lacking for a lot of us. So I know that everyone's already touched on a lot of this, but I just kind of want to echo some of the things that were said. Having space, adequate space for vocational programming. Right now, my staff are taking youth off campus for a lot of the vocational programming that they're receiving. And having the ability to have different kinds, almost like a multi-purpose vocational training center, so that we can best meet the needs of the youth who may not yet be able to leave campus. Therapy rooms. So when we're thinking about individual rehabilitation plans, which is something that we're required to submit to the court, we need to ensure that we have enough therapy rooms to meet the goals of the individual rehabilitation plan. So that's super important as well. Having adequate space for education and having the technology for education in all of the classrooms. The other thing that's super important is allowing for youth to separate themselves and go to a quiet study space. For youth who are going to college, I actually have 3 of our youth in our facility, SYTF, that are actually in one of my college courses. And so they're writing to me to say, I'm really sorry that, I might have turned in my assignment late because, X, Y, and Z. So to allow for them to have the ability to not have to watch television and to be able to kind of get away from that and go to a quiet study space is super important. I know that we don't struggle with having green space. Our youth have the ability to raise a garden and go outside and get fresh air, but having green space is super important for youth who are going to be incarcerated. Sensory rooms are important. I love the idea of ensuite bathrooms. My only concern is the having that constant sight and having the ability. So the signs of life technology, we really need to figure that piece out, because that's something that would be absolutely necessary if you're going to have an ensuite bathroom, just for safety purposes. Something that I don't see in the Title 24 that I don't think anyone has mentioned is artwork and having art in your facility. That's something that we're trying to bring in is a muralist to really kind of capture the ideas of the youth who are in our facility. Having a space where you can do your laundry. And really, I guess all of this is kind of centered around autonomy and allowing people, if you have that, if they have earned that ability and that trust, allowing for them to kind of move as freely as they can within the space is important as well. A kitchenette, I love the idea. I think it's super important to allow for our young people to get a snack when they're hungry. I can't fathom not having access. The other thing is, I really feel that facilities should have their own kitchen, their own culinary space where I'm not relying on the jail to provide food to my youth. I really hate that. And I wish that I had a kitchen, and I wish I had the funds to build a kitchen, because I hate relying on the jail to feed my youth. And I think that's all for now.
Well, this is challenging being last. So ditto to everyone. One of the first things that I recognize that our youth were thriving for is music. Our kids love music. Everybody wants to be a rapper. And there are things I've sat down with them before and said, you know, there's other things in the music industry that you can do. And we're actually working on music executives coming into our facility. There are a lot of things that we spoke of today that we're fortunate enough to have in our facility. But one of the things that we don't have is it being in Apple Valley. We're so far away from people who want to drive up there. So the only thing that I want to add to this group is just something that's everyone has said is creating space that allows us for change. So what kids like last year is not the same this year. And I shouldn't say kids, youth, what the youth like. And we also have such a variety of ages in our facility. I have someone 15 and someone 23. They don't like the same things. I need to have a space that isn't as childish for the older youth, and I need to have things that are appropriate. So I think that in regards to just Title 24, just that one of the requirements would be the spacing and the space to allow for change and for growth, the unexpected growth. Everybody can do a little of all of this in their facilities within their abilities without even changing the facility. We have a room for youth to visit with their parents that isn't like the room that you described. We have space for our youth to meet with their children. I have one 18-year-old who has 4 children. He meets with them every Saturday. We have toys. We buy new toys. We have a changing table. We have all of that. My predecessor thought of everything when we opened our facility, but we don't have everything that we need. And space is one of the things that we would like to add. So in the sake of time, I don't want to duplicate the things that you all said, but ditto.
Okay, Joni, we said you could have one more shot.
Okay, I thought everyone's comments were really great, and I don't know if I have anything new. I will say that I do really love the idea of a kitchen and washer and dryer within a secure youth facility. I think that would be amazing, like really working on skills like that. And also like a desk area, as Ezekiel was saying, and as everyone else. But no, nothing new. I think I really appreciated everybody's comments.
Yes.
I did have a couple more. One of the things that I noted was in the presentation were the sleep masks. So yeah, I don't think that we have to worry so much about having the ability to not have the natural light. I think if we provided the sleep masks, that would help significantly. That's an easy fix and they're really cheap. So I loved that. I live in the Central Valley and it's hot. So indoor exercise is important. The space for that. I liked the community engagement for the when you're planning the design. I also thought that potentially we could utilize our JJDPCs, our Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Commissions, because we are required to have formerly incarcerated folks on those committees. So I think they would be super helpful in that. But the biggest thing too is that not having cement beds and having actual furniture is something that's super important, particularly for the SYTF population.
Thank you. Does anyone else have just something they forgot that they want to say? Okay. Yes, Ezekiel.
Just very quickly, wanted to add to what Kelly and the education piece. I think one thing that would help a lot and would just change it is requiring in-person instructors. Because a lot of the time what I've seen is it's a lot of Zoom going on right now. And I feel like the youth aren't engaged. We all know how Zoom goes. You're not going to be engaged, especially in an incarcerated environment. An instructor coming up on Zoom, you're not really getting the full education experience. So requiring in-person instructors let the teachers know that Zoom days are over. My mom's a teacher, so I could say that. And then the locations, if thinking about like the location of the facilities, making sure that they're in a good environment, that the surrounding buildings around or the surrounding streets are in a bad environment. One thing I see, like Kilpatrick, for example, is in a nice environment, and you will probably see a lot of community pushback or public perception is what it was called, public perception. But really pushing for better locations for our facilities, and as we look towards the future, making sure that the location is in a good area that just helps our young people grow and develop as young people, and isn't a risk to their safety if they do have the flexibility of having a badge to come in and out, or if the facility is not fully secured, but having it in a safe environment just in case, and giving our young people that experience something out of the city, I feel like is good. But with that, also providing some type of close relationship with the families, like either providing some type of transportation for the visits, gift cards for the families too, or a bus. I know DJJ was doing a bus for a long time. I feel like I'm missing something else, and my head just. I think that's it. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Roberto, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think a good model to start is obviously college campuses. There's plenty of beautiful campuses that have all the amenities that we talked about. And then also for the vocation piece, maybe like occupational centers are really good places to start at looking at like what a facility would look like for vocational and educational trainings, because an occupational center is very different than a college, a community college, or a college campus and structure. So those are like be good places to start. Like if we could have both on a SNY TF facility, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Chris?
I was just thinking kind of the mental health perspective of these facilities, and it's just, I mean, everything we touched upon is, just the programs they were describing. I mean, that's nail on the head for me. So as much as we can create, the colors, like Kelly said, the senses, and just all those pieces coming together to create an environment for our youth where they are comfortable and learn to grow. I think the opportunity to have those therapy spaces where they can, group space for groups to occur. And I think like she was saying, with the adaptability of the facility so that it can change. And one of the things I was thinking, we used to have music equipment, so that were pianos and things like that. So a space for kids to actually express their musicality.
Wonderful. Yes.
Just want to say, as far as Title 24 is concerned, one of the things that I would love to see that is included is just what we talked about earlier, the signs of life. That's huge to me. That was a game changer. That's one less staff I have to pay.
Yeah.
That we have shortage of. So that would be absolutely perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to be getting some research on it. And I know the Chief Rochester already Googled it. This is such great information. Okay, so I think we're ready to go to public comment. Okay. So Ezekiel, this is your task.
Okay. So we will now be going into the public comment portion of this meeting. We will be starting with in-person public comments. If you have submitted a card or have not, please submit a card to Lindsay. If you If you want to give a public comment, please submit that card to Lindsay. You will be called on in the order which they're received. Please indicate if you know what regulation or topic you'd like to comment on, and we'll be flexible to make sure you're heard. And after in-person public comment, we will be going on to Zoom and definitely recognize the Zoom participants in the room. And we'll give them a chance to speak. But, Lindsay?
Okay, the first public comment card we have is from Edgar Gutierrez from Milpa.
Maybe.
Not working.
Hold on. We'll get it going.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, that's right. Buenas tardes. My name is Edgar Ernesto Ibarra Gutierrez. I'm the Program and Communication Coordinator at Milpa, a community-based organization out of Monterey in Santa Cruz County. Wanted to thank the panelists earlier for coming through and giving this that much needed information, and thank each and every one of y'all for your work in your respected areas and region. I'm speaking in regards to the Title 24, and one thing that before I move into particulars, is wanting to really urge this body to move with caution as we move into this whole area of building and revamping new facilities. There's the propensity and the possibility to go into this whole boom of building facilities that are not adequate and leaving aside our communities and the community in dilapidated and poor conditions. I still believe that we're investing in the wrong places, even though we have a population of young kids that are going to need our help. That is the wrong place. They're still going to go back to the community where it's dilapidated, under-resourced, under-invested. And that's where we really need to put our money and our ideas together. But saying all that to just say that in this, for the sake of the Title 24 and what can happen in 3 to 5 years from now, I would really encourage this board to not just talk about the Sweat Lodge or Native American spiritual services and consider them in that way, but also like, what does an arbor look like? What does it look like to have different practitioners and Native American services come in? And that doesn't fall within the chaplain box that they try to put our folks in. Remember that our folks fought for the spiritual rights to practice it at every single level from 1978 and at different moments. So we should be giving every single young person that has that opportunity to practice the way they want. Access to green and open spaces. I went to UC Davis. There was the Arboretum where you can walk and do all those different things and have a good opportunity there. Access to the law library for pre and post-educated folks. That's super important. And no, we're talking about a SYTF in this particular portion, but being able to uplift the human dignity and the holistic healing of that young person is the most important thing for that. Thank you for your time. And just remember, don't just rebrand into this whole component of rehabilitation. We really just got to invest in our communities. The most important thing. Gracias.
But just before we go on, I'm hearing that the Zoom audience wants to swap view because they're seeing teeny tiny public comment, very large, how to make a public comment. Is there a way to do that? Thank you so much. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Our next public commenter is Malcolm Slater from Milpa.
Hey, good afternoon to the board. My name is Malcolm Slater. I'm with MIPA and I was incarcerated in CYA for 4 years as a youth. And I'm here to encourage this board to consider that in order to continue to move forward in a manner that focuses on the betterment and humanity of incarcerated youth, then a different approach and supporting structure should be incorporated into these youth lives. And I'm talking about Title 24 and such as like green areas that are accessible to all youth to take advantage of various recreational activities and aerobic rec, and more access to vocational and educational opportunities for individuals' success in life, and more access to one's own support system like family and friends that help build stability and more time and days to do this in areas to accommodate all youth and their families within spaces that allow access to food, drinks, in open air settings, and an area that supports youth to bond with their children as well, if any youth or parents during their incarceration, to nurture healthy and essential relationships. And that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next commenter is Israel Villa with California Alliance for Youth and Community Justice.
Good afternoon, muy buenas tardes. Israel Villa, he, him, his with CYCJ. And just before I start my comment, I just want to say that there are some good things and there has been some positive changes. I feel where probation is concerned. Yes, there's been progress in some ways. But with that, I'm going to read my comment. And there's nothing personal, as always, nothing personal. This is my feelings, this is my truth, and this is what it is. SB 823 is a legislative opportunity to shift from California's failed systematic racist punishments model and approach. However, it is very clear that CPOC and probation, although they sound real good, they are not ready for this change, as most elected to place a secure youth track facility in juvenile halls, which is horrible. Rather than electing less restrictive, and I want to encourage this, the language is less restrictive, not step down, because step down makes it feel like they have to step down from this place. What place? Unfortunately, they're in juvenile hall. That's what happened, right? So less restrictive options, such as camps and ranches. On the contrary, they rushed to close them, and now I see why. This process, although absolutely critical, is not, they are now what they call grandfathered in, so this amazing work will not impact or apply as it is not retroactive. We are seeing and hearing this narrative and push reminiscent of the super predator narrative, which was a very effective tactic from the 90s to dehumanize me and my peers from that generation. I was on a QQED live yesterday morning where the chief from Sacramento mentions these older youth coming back with gang ties, tattoos on their face, and fentanyl addictions. Let's be very clear. These are the same children and young people who the same specific counties and county systems have failed, and who made the decisions along with the residing judges to send them to a worse place, which was CYA or DJJ. And so these same very folks advocating for more resources for the special population, the special, no. These are the same kids who you failed and who are returning back further harmed, further traumatized, that need more help. And they need a whole new, different approach, because the Title 15, the 24 as it is, and it was shared today, and oh man, it was triggering, but it's so true of my, I'm open with my mental health concerns, and it was shared today. It causes everything that I'm dealing with, and that's the outcome. That's what we're doing to these kids. And we know the recidivism rates, and it's still a pipeline to prison. So this is our chance to do something better. So please, I encourage you all to come with your heart, let your heart lead, come with your paternal, maternal, especially the mamas. You know, the mamas have always kept our families together, but just do what's right, you know, do what's right. And these kids, they really need our help. And historically, we haven't helped them, we failed them. Thank you. And thank you for your service. This has been an amazing dialogue today, and it's very exciting. The direction is exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Carlos Hernandez from Milpa.
Good afternoon to the board. It'll be hard to follow that up, but I'll try. I want to thank you for what it seems to be a sincere discussion on the topic. But I also want to caution the board about being careful not to contribute to a building boom and the furtherance of new and improved carceral warehouse of the California youth. Funds should be allocated to the uplifting and healing of our communities, so our youth are not being dumped into youth facilities that can rehab them, as these regulations will not be retroactive. With that noted, I do encourage you to uplift the use of current spaces as well as future spaces to Native American spiritual practices and community gardens. There continues to be a spiritual disconnect that has rooted itself in our communities that should be acknowledged and addressed in the trauma-informed settings of future SYTFs. Like going forward, it's like how everybody noted, we need to put this money into the community. Yeah, we need to do what we got to do for them while they're inside, and there's spaces for that, and there is programs for that, and we can do better with what we have right now. But I think I just really want to uplift that aspect, that let's not contribute to a rehab boom. Let's not contribute to a building boom, but we're going to see more. You build it, they will come. That's just been the historical context that we've seen. They built 33 prisons and everybody came. We filled them up over capacity, and now we're still trying to get them below capacity. We're doing great, but we're starting to see a rise in, we're seeing a decrease in population, but we're seeing a rise in longer stays. And with that, I just want to really uplift that to you guys. You guys are doing a great job having wholehearted discussions, and then just continue to have those, but be cautious, please. Thank you.
If I'm not pronouncing your name right, please correct me. Nonali Navarro from Fly.
It's okay. It's a hard name to pronounce. Nayeli Navarro, pronoun she, hers, ella. I am from Fly. I'm a youth policy fellow and I'm from Santa Clara County. I'm also a community member and I'm also a mother. So I wanted to comment on the recent law that was passed, SB 823. In there, it says that there was a lot of funding provided to counties to take these public health approaches. But if we really want to take a public health approach, then we're going to need new regulations, because these existing regulations that were made for juvenile facilities, they weren't made with a public health approach. Another thing I would really like to see changed, I enjoyed the presentation. There was a lot of great ideas up in there, all focused on rehabilitating, all focused on trauma informed. But we really need to change this culture that we live in. I know you guys noticed their culture over there is nothing like it is over here. It seems like over here, we really need to understand that these youth, before they were put into the system, before they were criminals, they were victims. They have a substantial increase of ACE scores. And it's really hard for me to talk about this because I'm formerly system involved. And so I've been through this stuff. And I know how people look at it, but they don't know the truth. Little people know the truth, and it's always the people who've been through this stuff. But before I was put into the system, I was a victim and I was failed by many different systems. So I would just agree that we need to provide the fundings back into our communities and change this culture and really just try and help our youth develop, help them gain social skills and help them, be these people that we want to see them back into our communities. Thank you.
Next, we have Colin Ford from Fresh Lifeline for Youth.
Good afternoon. My name's Colin Ford. I'm a policy associate with Fresh Lifelines for Youth, FLY. First, SB 823 provides a chance to leave the old facility models behind. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves to attempting to make facilities feel less like facilities, or these prison-like places to feel less prison-like. This is a chance for something completely new. I appreciated the comments and conversations today about things like kitchens. I can imagine a large kitchen that youth have access to with a dining table, a space for communal living where youth are cooking together, meal planning at the beginning of the week, and then breaking bread together. Community gardens, I can imagine a chance to connect with nature, build new skills, and be able to harvest fresh produce to use for those meals. For the vocational and educational programs, I think we need to make sure we're not just using one option or career path, but a variety of options that are specifically gearing toward chances to attend school, internships, or apprenticeships, and not just down the line or as a step down, but as quickly as possible as normal excursions in the experience, and ultimately then as a piece of a less restrictive program. The last thing I want to say is that I think all of these things need to be incorporated into Title 24 for SYTFs. I think we need to create these spaces, but ultimately we can't regulate ourselves out of our current situation. We can't regulate ourselves out of this if the culture doesn't change, specifically the staff culture is not changed. It doesn't matter what type of facility we're building, remodeling, or using, even if it's a secure college campus. Having a kitchen doesn't matter if there's not staff who are brought in who want to see youth succeed and engage in that meal planning, cooking, and eating together. You can't have some sort of home-like environment if you feel uncomfortable or if you feel unsafe. I thought it was interesting that the panelists from Northern Ireland really found that question about their regulations odd, because that's not something they're thinking about. What they're thinking about is how to create the best experience and environment for young people so that they can thrive every single day. The last thing is that we also can't regulate ourselves out of this without the political will. SB 823 was not signed into law to close DJJ and then replace it with new DJJ-like facilities in each and every county. And that's exactly what's happening as probation places these SYTFs, I think, very strategically into existing juvenile hall units and then pretending as if there's some new type of thing. It's up to the leadership of the BSCC and OYCR to make sure that we honor the spirit of SB 823 and transform this system for our young people. I hope today's conversations represented genuine commitments and not convenient platitudes. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Our next speaker is Ebony Richards with Youth Advisory Council.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony Richard. I'm with the Youth Advisory Council for Alameda County. I just want to make some general comments about everything I was just hearing, well, mostly about the end of the conversation. And I just wanted to ask, like, why are youth making these choices that they're making in the community is for privilege, the privilege to be able to go outside and be able to do stuff that they need to do for their lives, for their family, for themselves, for their peers. I like to hear the fact that you guys want to invest in like traveling for the youth and stuff, because like I said, a lot of the reasons why the youth are putting themselves in these predicaments is that so they can achieve and see these other places or even just a view from a different room. And then also letting them know that college isn't the only way that they can succeed. All youth don't have the mental capacity to go to college. Whether they have a supportive system or not, all youth are just not equipped for college. So just having that aim for them to just be like, okay, college is the only way out is not ideal. I would say giving them access to like financial literacy, educating them on capitalism and stuff like that, what it means to achieve success. Like it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't really matter if they have a supportive system or not. A lot of these stuff is just that we're used to pushing on the children is just not ideal. For instance, Alameda County pays $500,000 to $800,000 to incarcerate a youth per year. Why not reinvest that money into the child? $500,000 to $800,000 is life-changing for anyone. Just imagine what $500,000 to $800,000 could do for a child, for an adult in itself. Giving these children access to know that real estate, banking, technology instruction, accounting, media personality, production, music, financial stability, engineering, business management. And because I would say over the last year, especially during the pandemic, how many youth have you seen at least by the age of 13 have been coming up and starting their own businesses and stuff like that, you know, without even stepping foot to even know what college really means, you know? So I just want to change the perspective, you know? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nancy Horace with Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice.
Good afternoon, Nancy Juarez with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. I understand that Title 24 is not retroactive, but I'd like to uplift that all counties are receiving $225,000 per young person returning to their county. Through the closure of DJJ, in just this fiscal year alone, counties as a whole received $118 million, and that is expected to double next year. $225K per young person, 118 mil just this year. We have to do better than just painting the walls purple. As the panelist Rachel Gibbs shared, their language has changed over the years, and California's language has also changed over the years, but our practice hasn't. We don't say solitary confinement anymore. We say safety rooms, but young people are still in them for 23 hours a day. We don't say punishment. We say positive youth development. But until we put standards in place that keep young people connected to their families, to their village, until we stop kidnapping youth from their communities, words will just be words. Youth need and deserve privacy. They deserve intentional rest. I urge this committee to review counties' attempts to create alternatives to juvenile hall. For example, San Francisco offered Edgewood as alternative to their juvenile hall. But according to Title 24, the corridors were too small because Title 24 says the corridors have to be 8 feet wide. How can we change the standards to ensure that attempts like San Francisco's aren't boxed out in this process? So I encourage y'all to review different counties that have attempted to find alternatives. And thank you.
Our last public comment is Noe Loza from Milpa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noeli Loesa, and I am really upset that I'm going last. But I just want to say I really appreciate the efforts that we are doing to move towards a better physical space, right? But there has been no conversation about the culture of staffing with the youth. I think making better buildings sure is great, but what happens when we have the same negative feelings towards youth? A lot of staff that have made public comments in previous meetings, their comments are not lovely about the youth. They come in with these preconceived notions that these youth are criminals, that they've done stuff, so therefore they deserve this treatment, right? So what happens when we make these institutions that are better looking, and then you have staff saying they don't deserve this? They have staff saying, why are they getting playrooms? So I think what we should be focusing on is the culture, the way that staff interact with the youth, the way that youth feel around the staff. Do they feel safe? Do they feel welcomed? Something that really stood out to me that Rachel Gibbs said is that their method is, you think of the youth as your child, they have a parenting method, right? And I don't know if any of you are parents, but if your child does something, I don't think that you automatically think of your child as a criminal. You think of like, oh, wow, like, okay, what can we do so that this doesn't happen again, But like when staff come in with preconceived notions of like, this person's a criminal, yada, yada, you take that humanity away from youth and you stop seeing them as humans and you see them as criminals, which then justifies the maltreatment that they go through in these facilities. So I appreciate the efforts to, make better facilities physically, but what are we going to do to make them better socially so that staff have better relations with youth, so that youth feel safe and supported in these buildings? Thank you.
Thank you. Was that our last public comment in person?
Yes.
Is there anybody else in the room that wants to provide public comment? I think everyone did provide public comment. Okay, we'll now be moving into the Zoom portion of public comment.
We have 4 public comments from Zoom, 5. First is Morgan Zamora.
Hello, everyone. Morgan Zamora, Prison Advocacy Coordinator at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. SB 483 promises to deliver a behavioral health and youth development approach in responding to young people accused of harm. We believe in centering the leadership and voices of young people that are directly impacted, and EBC's Alameda County survey suggests that youth do not see law enforcement entities as a source of safety and are eager for alternative avenues to resolve conflict and foster rehabilitation. These survey results indicate a strong desire for young people to be given access to community instead of being treated as adults within the carceral system. We want to ensure that system-involved youth receive the humanity necessary to foster their continued development. 2 suggestions that we have to best align with the proposed restorative nature of SYTFs are providing access to gender-affirming clothing, healthcare, and physical facilities, and having nothing resembling solitary or room confinement. Access to gender-affirming care amongst transgender and non-binary youths is associated with decreased adverse outcomes, including lower recidivism rates, as well as reduced instances of self-harm. We want to ensure that these facilities provide ample resources and protection to these vulnerable populations to help facilitate real transformation. Solitary confinement and the trauma associated with it can cause permanent psychological damage. We know that isolation is especially harmful to youth whose still developing brains are more susceptible to the effects of long-term stress. Extended isolation and other punishments involving restricted access to communal spaces and peer engagement created lasting harms on youth in CYA and DJJ's care. It is no surprise that more than half of these youth indicated suicide risk, or that over 3/4 of youth returning home from the DJJ were rearrested within 3 years of their release. We urge you to avoid past mistakes in the handling of youth justice and ensure that these children are not re-traumatized, but rather provided the care, healing, and opportunity that they need to thrive. Thank you.
Next, we have Sonia from CURYJ.
Hi there. One moment. Sorry, can you hear me? Make sure this is working on my part. Okay, I'm gonna try again. I can't hear you all. Can you hear me?
You sound good.
Okay, so sorry. So I'm actually in the room with some members and participants at Courage. So if it's possible, after my time is up, I'd like to be able to allow other people to speak and offer their own individual public comment.
That'll be fine, Sonia.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you all, first of all, for the conversation today. My name is Sonia Tonneson-Castellano. I'm the Policy and Legal Director with Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice. We're based in Oakland and work across Alameda County and the Bay and do statewide work as well. I really want to make sure that with any regulations that are being drafted as a part of this process, that everyone on this committee that's designing regulations that are brand new for the first time in the history of our state is asking yourself, are we putting lipstick on a pig? Are we designing a golden cage? And I ask that very seriously because we have been part of a 30-year process to reduce and inch towards eliminating youth incarceration across the state of California. We do not want SB 823 and the opportunity it's giving all of you and all of us as a state to be the time that we pour money into making beautiful cages with terrible cultures. So this is an opportunity to design new regulations. We need to not just be talking about secure, which as you all define it in a carceral way, right? We need to think about security in terms of community support. What keeps us secure? If you ask yourself, what makes you secure? Is it your income? Is it your education? Is it your partner? Is it your children? Is it your shelter? Is it a beautiful space that you can go to on the weekend? What makes people secure? What makes people safe? So we need to be thinking long-term about what opportunities need to be available. And those don't need to necessarily be carceral settings. Nothing in SB 823 or SB 92 requires us to lock young people up. And we have been on a 30-year pathway. Let's not end now to end youth incarceration. I think this 3-year implementation plan, when these go into effect into 2026, let's plan a future where we don't have juvenile halls, where we have places in the community that can fully support young people to heal and to thrive. And so I think we need to also have regulations completely separate for SYTF that include what are the requirements for non-secure services and supports that are based in the community. The requirement is the least restrictive, appropriate environment. That's already the law. This isn't a dream. This is currently the law. So if we're only thinking about how to make juvenile halls prettier, then we're not following the law. We're not doing what SB 823 asks, which is to reduce the use of confinement and improve the continuum of community-based approaches through a positive youth development and public health approach. I know Ezekiel said this, I want to uplift it. We need a plan for spaces that don't have fences, that don't have locks. Let's plan for those alternatives to incarceration. Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic to Alex Diaz.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, my name is Alex Diaz. I'm the Dream Beyond Bars program coordinator. And I just wanted to really echo off of what Sonia said. As a young person, I spent a lot of time inside a juvenile hall here in Alameda County. One of the things that did happen there a lot was that, there was staff shortages and things, and the facility wasn't set up or designed in order to give us any of the accesses that we needed in order to see the outside world. Even at that time, the facility was set up where at any moment, if there wasn't enough staff, visitations would be through a glass window, kind of like an adult setting. And there was other things there that just were like super inhumane, and it was a really, really bad treatment. And that's like kind of the default. So when you're creating these new facilities or whatever you're doing, right, when you're thinking of like reshaping and reimagining them, like I would just say, don't let that be the default either. Don't let going back to like, we're going to shut it down. We're going to lock it down. We're going to run it like what I've been seeing in the SBA 2-3 units. Cause I do some work in there, is that like, they take a lot of the punishment that's been going on for DJJ, but they don't take the good things. They don't take like the fire camps, the things that if youth are doing good, or the youth that, you know, I also don't want to label it like every single youth is a bad youth. And I think that's another lens too. It's like every single youth that goes to the SB 823 units is someone who's bad or horrible. No, it just also means that like, we got to think about like, how do we give every single person the opportunity to be able to go to somewhere like a fire camp, to go to a camp, to go somewhere that doesn't mean locked or closed confinement. And yeah, I would just say, just thinking about that, like, don't default back to, well, we're going to shut it down. If something goes wrong, we'll still give staff the opportunity, or people who are working in units the opportunity to just have that be the default. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
And then, yes, I will go next. My name is Xochitl Larios. I'm actually the Youth Justice Coordinator here at Courage, and I work closely with our young people directly incarcerated in Alameda County Juvenile Hall. And I know that a lot of our SBA 23 plans have been developed. Some have been already implemented, and some of the things that I noticed in our implementation is that there's shortages of staff in departments, shortage of staffs in our juvenile halls. However, I really feel like the regulations have individual regulations for how things should be built and ran. However, how are the regulations talking to one another? For example, in the kitchen, each facility has a kitchen where our county workers work really hard to prepare food for our young people for the day. However, the regulations don't talk to one another, where we might want to add in description, a youth from inside custody can support with kitchen activities, but not limited to. So this speaks to having different regulations versus just one, to develop a real pipeline to reentry and skill base to increase their economic mobility outside a locked, closed confinement. And also evaluating when BSCC does their inspections, really asking the young person, how are these changes really affecting your professional development, and if some of these changes are also really trauma informed. And I think we have one final speaker. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello, my name is Artis. I'm a DBB fellow with Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice. Today, I was here to speak on the fact that I feel like it's not right that we're making plans for juvenile hall 3 years out and we're supposed to be closing it. We should be taking steps to closing it, as well as improving the programming while it is still open. I feel like programming and basic necessities are neglected in juvenile halls. Youth are only given body washes that are highly, like, for example, I had a girl in there and she was allergic to pineapples. A lot of people are allergic to pineapples. For us to be only having pineapple scented body wash, there's no shampoo, there's no conditioner, like there's no options. We're treated as if we're real criminals when most of the people are in there for poverty. And that's not right. I feel like we need to have access to our basic necessities. There needs to be real commissary until you guys close juvenile halls, and stop trying to work on the outside and how the building appears and working on toilets and stuff like that, and work on making it more comfortable for the youth, because the jail is already not helping them.
Thank you.
Next, we have Juan Gomez.
Yeah, my name is Juan Gomez. I'm the executive director and co-founder at MILPA. And yeah, I wanted to address the fact that even our work around young adult units, young people, has been mentioned. And one thing's for sure, that the big thing on prisons, jail detentions, whatever you want to call them, they're cruel, dangerous, toxic, dilapidated, and racist. That has led to numerous lawsuits, suicide, violence, trauma, and basically systemic terror. Now, at no time whatsoever, will we be able to engage in lawsuits or in litigation, because California is now going to be leading the nation in building out sustainable carceral infrastructure, right? There's almost this over-reliance and obsession with building this kind of like nice freaking carceral infrastructure that basically undermines and undercuts everything we've been wanting to achieve. Having been some of the individuals and part of organizations and groups who went there to ensure that we were thinking about and practicing healing-informed, trauma-centered approaches, now it's just being all just watered down, it's being white-streamed. There's even the school to prison pipeline. Now what we're seeing even in schools, they're becoming full-service community schools. And essentially, the education system is reflecting the juvenile system and the adult system. There's a $380 million investment in just the prison. How much can $380 million do in a community, right? We need like food, we need like climate, you know, we need to think about those type of things, but you're essentially already, you know, you're cozying up and making something like a boutique style situation for our young people to come to. And we don't even need to be talking about more building out and secure facilities. You guys need to be thinking about, yeah, there should be no entry. And we don't even need to be talking about prevention, but promotion. What are we really for? So it's sad that we can be in California and then we're still like getting tough on crime and smart on crime at the same time. So there's almost like no way for us to even win in this situation. So I would just encourage you all to really think about the community and building out community infrastructure, because essentially what's going to happen is we're going to be faced to be pitted against regular voters and common citizens who are like, hell nah, we're over here, we don't have no jobs, we don't have no housing, and you're making all these nice things for all these individuals who are being stigmatized and stuff like that. So I just wanted to share, I don't appreciate our name being lifted as Milpa in this type, because they don't understand that we did facilitate and coordinate some international exchanges, and we went there and we talked to those system leaders and prison officials, and it was horrible. They weren't thinking about systemic racism. The people of color were still living in poverty and dilapidated conditions in those communities. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And adelante.
Next, we have Kels.
Can you hear me? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, cool. Thank you. My name is Felipe Kelly. I am the policy fellow for the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. I was formerly incarcerated, sentenced to 40 years to life at the age of 15, and served 23 years in prison. I will be speaking on the secure youth treatment facility. It is important to note that Title 24 is not retroactive, which is a problem because if those juvenile facilities are not up to code and are in complete violation of any code of conduct, there is no accountability in place. The previous DJJ budget should be reinvested into youth programming that can build real alternatives to incarceration, not secure youth treatment facilities that are essentially still jails and prisons. We at the Ella Baker Center don't believe that building an institution to lock up our youth can have any components of healing, wellness, or abolition. Looking at this report, I am disgusted with the idea of trying to make juvenile halls comfortable and livable with the goal in mind of continuing to lock up our youth when there are so many alternatives to incarceration. These are our babies, our children, and not grown adults who have experienced levels of trauma, abuse, neglect, sexual violence, and kidnapping. Instead of getting them help, y'all lock them up for expressing trauma that was never processed because there is no help available. Who is failing who? But if the powers that be are hell-bent on locking up our youth, those facilities shouldn't resemble anything of a lockup institution, which is why there are other avenues of treatment and restorative justice practices. The Ella Baker Center would like to see an emphasis on educational, vocational, tech, and trauma-informed placement centers that are strictly focused on self-reflection, healing, processing, mental health care, no use of pepper spray, handcuffs, gorilla cuffs, nightsticks, or slamming of staff of any kind to address expressions of trauma between our babies or others. Our youth should be able to shower daily, have access to family through overnight visits or hours of visitation, no solitary confinement of any kind, or searching of personal property or searching our youth. Thank you.
Next, we have Kia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kia Duclay. As a CSEC youth placed in juvenile hall, I didn't need rehab or correction. I simply needed people to care and treat me as a human from a whole person wellness approach. I heard everyone say, sorry, that's my kiddo. I heard everyone say we are raising these youth, and on the other side, someone said that we already got everything. But I wonder if these were your children, would you raise them that way? Would a steel bed frame or a cold foldable cot be adequate bedding for a youth that is yours? As someone who was trafficked and criminalized for 10 years of my life, I was counted out when I just wanted to be seen and heard. I felt broken and defeated. I felt broken and defeated. With the right people, I am now on my way to graduate from school for electrical engineering, and I am now the supervisor of programming. Do not count our youth out, but better yet, offer them full, loving, kind, and caring support. You cannot teach compassion, so just do it. I ask that you guys don't just work on making the facilities look better, but also working on making sure that the staff fully care for our youth by treating them like people versus criminals. Thank you.
Next, we have Stacy Nunez.
Good afternoon. My name is Stacy Nunez. I'm an education attorney with the Youth Justice Education Clinic at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. I represent some of the SYTF youth. I'd like to uplift what others have shared and ask the committee to ensure that the regulations that will apply to future facilities align with SB 823 and require the creation of safe and supportive environments, but also to ensure that these regulations create environments in which young people who enter can actually grow and rehabilitate and connect to resources that they will continue to access once they return to their communities. The regulations should require that future facilities include sleeping units with windows that allow young people to get sunlight, whether or not they can go outside that day, with curtains that could block out light when they go to sleep, desks that they can sit at, write letters, read books. They especially need bathrooms like the ensuite bathrooms that were mentioned so that youth don't have to depend on whether or not staff are available to let them meet their basic needs, like use the restroom in the middle of the night. These spaces should include recreational areas, not just for exercise, but playgrounds where they can visit with their children if they have them, and spaces where they can eat together with their families during visits, like the cafe that Rachel Gibbs brought up in her presentation. These spaces should include enough space to allow for robust programming to happen throughout the facilities. Currently, bungalows are used as classrooms or spaces where programming occurs, but that should not be the long-term plan. And the youth should have access to these spaces, even if there are no staff to take them, because it is vital to their growth and development to have consistent access to robust programming. There's no point in having beautiful spaces and varied programming if the young people can't access it when they need it. I greatly appreciate what was mentioned regarding classrooms and making sure that they are more dynamic and accessible for students, not just physically, but with key cards that young people can use, but in terms of having classrooms that take into account how young people have different learning needs, such as ADHD, and having classrooms that allow those students to have the opportunity to stand and have more movement while learning without being punished for it. I would also encourage the committee to continue collaboration with the experts who presented today and work together to develop regulations that can help us move toward a real health-centered, holistic environment, not just in the physical structures, but in the culture. We heard from Rachel how the culture within the staff is what made change possible, and that's the change we really need to see in the facilities throughout California. Thank you.
Next, we have James Martinez.
Good evening, board, community. It's a lot to digest, a lot that was shared today. And I really want to uplift some of the things that are taking place with some of our relatives out there in Northern Ireland. But in all reality, what's taking place here within the state of California is a lot of behavior that is detrimental to the well-being of our youth that are within these facilities. There was a historical moment when DJJ was closed. And this is a historical opportunity for us to revision our future and to see what the possibility looks like if we re-envision these spaces and places where we're sending our youth. When we have these conversations, those on the board, I want you to consider something. I want you to consider if you would have your children in these spaces, and if they ever made a mistake, would this be a place you want them to go? And think about some of the social factors that go on in being in these spaces. A prison could be made out of gold, but it's still a prison. It doesn't take away from what it is in its essence. Let us be mindful that we can make a difference, not create a system that has oppressed and continues to oppress people of color for many different walks of life. I ask that y'all consider everything that's being shared here today. And as y'all make decisions with your hearts and not your mind. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
And lastly, we have Christopher Kirchner.
Hello. So I was a youth offender. I was arrested at the age of 16, sentenced to life without parole, did 30 years in prison, and was recently released 2 months ago. I've heard a lot of conversation today, and one thing I'll say is it's tragic that many youth in all over the world grow up in families of dysfunction, where there's substance abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, and so on and so forth, that leads to trauma. And those children don't know how to cope with that trauma, express that trauma, so it comes out in very negative ways, substance abuse, violence, and a lot of behavior that can land a young person in prison. I agree that a lot of money and resources should be funneled into the communities that suffer from these things, and we should be really trying to capture the youth before they end up incarcerated. However, we're not going to catch everybody, and I believe that if children are incarcerated or young people are incarcerated, that it's very beneficial to provide positive programming. I'm a benefit of positive programming, and it has changed my life. It has provided me opportunities to gain job skills. It has provided me opportunities to gain insight into myself and into my actions against other people, and how I've harmed other people and how I've harmed my community. And it really has helped me transform my way of thinking, and it's taught me compassion, it's taught me empathy for others, and I just really value all the programming that's been implemented within the prison system here in California. And I think that if I had been exposed to that when I was younger, because this wasn't around when I came to prison in the early 90s, that I would have benefited much sooner than I did. It took me many years for me to be able to access such programming, and I'm grateful that it was provided. But I do believe that a lot of the money should be directed towards prevention. But I also believe that devoting a lot of that money to institutions, as far as like college, trades, even just groups, is very beneficial. I've seen the effects of it on people, and I'm a product of that. And I just want to say thank you for that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
We have no more public comment on Zoom.
Okay, so it looks like we're at the end of public comment, Ezekiel.
Yes.
And at this time, I think we're going to be getting a little bit of information maybe from BSCC staff on next steps.
Okay. Yes, and I would just like to thank everybody who waited patiently to give public comment from the community, all of those that came to speak on behalf of the young people, and definitely all of those that were once incarcerated in DJJ and various incarcerated facilities that came to speak today. I really think it helped us wrap up this conversation and still continue to have in-depth conversation. Really appreciate those from Milpa who brought in the healing practices, but not just healing practices, more of the education and the educators to come into the room. I feel that that is something that all young people should have access to learn the education, the culture, and also be able to participate in a healing circle. Because I definitely think all our young people, if we really are talking about trauma-informed care, it definitely is rooted in healing and getting those, getting that education to our young people and that culture for them to understand and start breaking the barriers that we put on our community. So thank you for everyone that showed up today and waited patiently and stood with us today in this BSCC SYTF meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ezekiel. Yes, thank you to everybody who was able to come here in person and to speak with us over Zoom. We appreciate your time and your comments, your input. So as far as next steps, what we will do as staff is we will take the concepts that we talked about and incorporate them into a proposed draft. We call them the proposed regulation revision draft. Again, we are having an ESC meeting on August 31st where they will pick up where they left off. They will also be going into Title 24 at some point. So while we're incorporating the SYTF subcommittee work into the draft, once the ESC is finished, we'll bring this group back together. I know we have some other discussion topics to talk about, such as the separate set or one set of regulations. So we will have another meeting to talk about that, and we will have a meeting. That meeting will also review and verify that we've captured all of your concepts into the draft regulations. I do want to point out that not every single comment and concept is taken into the Title 24 regulation. Same thing with the Title 15, but we will be able to explain what the analysis of each of those issues are and why or why not something may not appear exactly as it was brought up in one of these meetings. So again, thank you so much to all of the committee members, to the members of the community, and certainly to everybody on our team for taking the time and be here today, to Chair Lucero and Co-Chair Nishiyama. Thank you all for being here. And if anybody has any questions.
I would like to just thank all of you too, the members who came from some of you traveled quite a distance, and the hard work and the thoughtful work that you put into this today, the BSCC staff, the folks who came in person also traveled distances. Thank you for your commitment. We are better when we have your input. We are able to really break out of our own tunnel vision. And so I just really appreciated what I heard in the room today and also on the Zoom room. And so please stay with us. Let us be our best self. And we'll see you at the next scheduled meeting, which is not scheduled yet. So I wish I could send you off with a date, but I can't. But travel safe. Thank you.